Hey, everybody. Welcome in to another episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser. And if you are tuning in, whether it be on YouTube or you're listening anywhere else you get podcasts, you know what time it is. It is time for a new episode. I have a guest on with me. And let me tell you, I am just really excited to have this guest on because a lot of other guests I've had on have brought up this person over the course of many, many interviews. And that person's finally here, ready to tell his story. Drew Demaio. Drew, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Jeff, man. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you as a guest because I'm a fan of a lot of the bands that you've played in over the years. You and I actually have a little bit in common here. And I think kind of going back to some of our roots, because you and I both went to high school in Coral Springs.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think if if you ever spent time or you ever grew up, just east of the Everglades, I think there's just like this natural bond that just happens from being kind of in the middle of nowhere, really. It's like at least that's the way kind of I perceived it when I landed there. Yeah, Coral Springs. I have some wild memories of that city, of that town, and I don't think I've been back there. And I could say South Florida as a whole, but specifically Coral Springs, man. Like anytime I meet somebody that's like, yeah, Coral Springs, and it's rare, but there are just these moments where you meet somebody, in my work or just wherever, and they mention Florida. I always ask like, oh, you're from Florida. Where are you from? And, once in a while I'll get like, oh, Broward County, Dade, Miami, West Palm Beach. And then, it's always like a conversation from there. Because it really is a strange place. And I moved there in the 80s, in the mid 80s. And if you really, Coral Springs in the mid 80s was a new city, I think. And I remember someone telling me that it might have only been like a decade old at that point. Like the entire city, the zoning for the city, the zip code was a decade old, and it looked it, grew up in, I moved there when I was 12, 13 from New York City. So I'm a native New Yorker, and it was a huge culture shock. Like it was really different. And there's a lot that goes with that. But I
was born in New York City as well. Now there's another thing we have in common there.
Oh, wow. Awesome, man. And yeah, I feel like and I met a lot of kids, growing up down there. They were like, his family were from New York, so I think at that time there were just a lot of families that were leaving New York, going to these new developments that were, this Western Fort Lauderdale. I feel like it was almost like a calling card for a lot of nor'easters or and New Yorkers to come down there. And there's always been that New York, Florida connection for whatever reason.
Oh yeah.
My grandfather moved down there in the 60s. And he was a lifelong Long Island and Brooklyn guy. And he just, whatever, like he had some sort of health issues or something. I think it was like some sort of, arthritis of some kind. And he wound up moving down there early when my dad was just like fresh out of high school. Boom, he's out. My dad's out of the house. Boom, him and my grandmother moved to St. Petersburg. So we spent a lot of time in Florida as kids, visiting my grandparents. And it's kind of, I guess, going on in a different direction already, but this is how I work. So so I remember my mother asking me once, we would visit my grandpa, and it was always great. We'd see the theme parks, and we'd go fishing, and we'd hang out on the beach, and it was awesome. Like, and my grandpa was a really great guy, and so going down there was always so amazing. And I just always remember like getting off the plane, when you get into the the catwalk there, and it's like boom, this like wall of like humidity and hot air, like you're walking into an oven, just hits you, because prior to that, you've been in this air conditioned tube for the last, 3 hours. And then prior to that, you were in gray, cold, disagreeable weather. So it was just like, oh man, even as a kid, I just remember like getting off the plane feeling like, whoa, like we're on a different planet. This place is so crazy. And my mother asked me once, we were going through a school zone. I mean, I could have been more than 10 years old. And I remember looking at the kids and I go, Mom, look at all these kids, She's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Would you ever want to live in Florida? And I was like, you mean I can live here? Like I didn't know that, like to me, to me, Florida was, and I don't mean this to kind of feed into the stereotype that all these old people live here, but I just didn't know it was for children, you know? I just associated with my grandparents and older folks, and it just never occurred to me that it was a place that people lived. It was a place that people went to go on vacation. Like that was all that you did.
Right.
Place. And that could, I get that makes me think of another strange childhood, uh, I don't know, fantasy is not the right word, but just the thought of I thought Christmas was only celebrated in New York City because all the Christmas movies always took place in New York or someplace that looked like New York. It was just they just did.
Right.
So and we weren't a religious family by any means, but again, it's like Florida is this and New York is this, and it was just funny when my mom's like, "Would you ever want to live in Florida?" And I remember saying something like, "Oh, we could live down here? Like, that's like allowed?"
Right.
So when we moved there in the 80s, my mom had taken a job, and she actually moved down there with her best friend, and her and her friend Sheila like knew each other for many years. They both came over from England together. They were au pairs, like nannies. And they met through, I guess, a mutual friend, both like young girls from England, and they moved. So when we moved to Florida, they were friends all throughout our childhood, and her kids, became my cousins, etc. And then when we moved down to Florida, we were really excited about it, like really excited about. I don't know if we're talking too much about Florida specifically, but
that's that. Yeah,
I know. That's what we're here to do, man.
That's what we're here to
talk about
do.
Florida.
Did you have your first concert experience in Florida?
Yeah. Thank you for the segue, because I could have just given you like the first 15 years of my life right there. Yeah, definitely did. My first concert experience. Oh man, fast forward. My first real rock concert was Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses. And Guns N' Roses opened. They were the opening band. And this was in my freshman year of high school, which would have been 1987. And they played at a place called the Hollywood Sportatorium. And now, admittedly, at this time, and I love Motley Crue, like just put it on the record that I'm a Motley Crue fan, at least when it comes to, their older records, the first couple records, and, maybe Theater of Pain, their third album. That's about as far as I go, I think. But I really wanted to go to a rock concert. And I'd never been, we were poor. Like my mom, we were dirt fucking poor, and there was no car, no access, and certainly no internet, and didn't really have any friends that had cars, at least not at that point. And Hollywood Sportatorium was 45 minutes away. This was Hollywood, right? So I couldn't even tell you where it was. I know it's not there anymore, but
right.
I just was dying to go to any rock concert, and I kind of had phased out of Motley Crue at this point. I mean, I'll probably run you through my kind of cornerstone bands, but I was really listening to a lot of Metallica and Slayer at this point. So Motley Crue were like, whatever, yesterday's news. But I really wanted to go to a concert. They were coming into town. A guy that lived in my neighborhood, my apartment complex. So we lived in like this shitty little apartment complex just off of Atlantic Boulevard by the Coral Square Mall, which I know you know where that is.
course. I've stepped
Yeah.
foot in that mall more times than I probably can count.
Oh yeah, man, totally. I could, yeah, a lot of Coral Square Mall time spent, a
You
lot.
remember the Coral Springs Mall?
Oh yeah, we used to call it the zombie mall because it
Yeah.
was just like dead. And
Did you ever go to Sid's inside of that mall?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally, yeah, 100%. Sid's Records was great.
Yeah.
We used to have a friend that worked there, Jimbo Smith, who would kind of turn us on to a lot of bands. He was a cool dude and well more versed in punk rock and stuff like that than I think a lot of us were. And he was just he was our age, but the dude's working at like this cool record store. Prior to Sid's, oh man, so many. We could really spend this whole podcast just talking about Coral Springs, just because it was very formative. It's just
Right.
everything regarding me. And look, you're 12, 13, 14, 15, high school. I mean, this is where all this happens, right? So for me, this all happened in Coral Springs. But yeah, Coral Springs Mall, a lot of crazy memories there. We used to sneak into movies. There's a movie theater in that mall.
Of course.
I was really into comic books in when I first moved to Florida. And I remember there's a great little comic book store in there. But yeah, man. Wild, yeah. I mean, look, that's Florida, right? Mall life. That's where you go. That's your downtown. That's where you're going to people watch. That's where you're going to just see life happen, because it never happened in like these cookie cutter developments and like McMansion neighborhoods, and the kind of sad thing about Florida that I really, especially South Florida, because I never really felt like I vibed with it, was just like the level of the amount of distance between people at all times. I'm back in New York City. I've lived back here now for 15 years, and every day it's just an interaction. Every day or like people communicating, whether you like it or not. That's happening. You're very close physically with a lot of people all the time, and I love it. I love that. I love that. I feel like I don't know what else we're supposed to do. Like I really hated feeling so isolated in that town. And I think, that isolation carried over, the feeling of isolation, I should say, carried over like well into like, not just the geographical layout of the town and the fact that it's suburbia, right? So you roll out of your air-conditioned house or apartment into your air-conditioned car, into the next air-conditioned place you're going to go. And in South Florida, like, that's the equivalent of getting out of a snowstorm. Like, that's what we do there. We race to the next air-conditioned environment. And so little actually happens outside. I mean, to the extent where so many neighborhoods and in Coral Springs and I mean, everywhere in suburbia, like, don't even have sidewalks. What did we have? We had those little like sewer things that, you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
just on the edge of everyone's manicured lawns, just these little waterways. And like, how are you supposed to interact with anyone, even in your little neighborhood, whether you lived in an apartment complex or a development or an actual literal neighborhood where some of the kids had nicer houses lived, where like, it was just like, wow, this is like a real neighborhood. Like, nobody's talking to each other. Nobody's interacting,
Sure.
and
were you living in Coral Springs when you got into your first band?
yeah. Well, no. I mean, it depends when we talk about music. When I think of my first band, I mean, if we're talking about, as a listener, as like a fan of music, I'm a child of the 70s and the 80s. So like, if you were 6 years old, and I can't generalize, right? This was my experience. So, I mean, Kiss, that was what was happening in 1978, 79. That's just that was the rock band that just had, risen to like these sort of like, godlike levels. I mean, just the marketing, they weren't even a band really, there was just more of like, Kiss toys and, Kiss t-shirts and Kiss records and Kiss posters and Kiss, meets the Phantom of the Park. And, just, Kiss had just turned into this crazy thing. And I actually, love them as a band, but at the time, it was just like, Dad, I want a Kiss doll. Like, that's just what I want, that was it. I didn't even really think of the musical connotations, with this particular band. But, that was really like my first time thinking, like, associating fantasy with music, like something about music is really fucking important. I don't, so important that these four guys from New York City can dress up like mimes in 7-inch platform heels and somehow be the biggest thing in the world. And, you look back at it now and it's like fucking laughable, man. Like, it's just so ridiculous. But whatever, it was what was happening. It was Kiss and Star Wars and all that stuff. But Kiss was sort of put kind of, that was just sort of like got this sort of my brain thinking about the connection between music and superhero-dom, if that's even a word. But
it can be for this episode.
The first time, I mean, if you want to talk about my first time I really connected with a band, man, I feel like I'm just going on and on, right? But that's what I'm supposed to do. All right, cool. All right. The first time I really connected with a band, well, my dad, he loved Motown music. That was always on in the house and in the car. Like anything out of Motown, Stevie Wonder, Diana Summer, the Temptations, the Commodores. We listened to that stuff endlessly. And I still I approach music in a very sort of Motown sort of way. I know that sounds ridiculous. That sounds almost like self-righteous to say, but when I it's rhythm. Rhythm is everything for me. I play very percussively. There's a lot of stop and start in my guitar playing, and I like to think dynamics, and I always follow the drummer. I'm on top of the drummer, and more so than probably I think most guitar players should be. It was like maybe I should have been a drummer or a bass player, but
have played bass though, right? In Argentina.
Yeah. I have played bass, and that was well, I'll certainly touch on that band because that was a pinnacle band for me. But that was a really great experience, and could be for reasons that I think I certainly didn't see it at the time. But the first band that really just made me love rock and roll was AC/DC. And it was only because a neighbor of mine, my parents had bought a place in Yonkers, New York. They both worked in Manhattan, wanted to get out of the city. So we kind of inched our way up through Riverdale. So Riverdale's the Bronx. It's just up the Hudson River. And then they had bought a place in Yonkers, just right on the border there. And I really connected with a group of kids in the neighborhood, specifically this one guy named Matt. And I mean, dude, I lived there from when I was 6 till I was 10. So just to give you some, age there, from 80 to 84, I lived in that house. And in that time, a lot happened in terms of me wanting to play music, in terms of me wanting to perform, for lack of a better term. I never really looked at it that way, but that's really what it is, right? So,
and you did send me a photo of your early years where you had your broom as your air guitar. So you started young,
and that was in that house, and, and it was which was really crazy because I came across that photo like more recently, just going through some old photos, and I'm just like, damn, like wow, like it's like I don't know, it made sense because I knew I was doing that, that's what we did. We picked up brooms and wiffle ball bats and tennis rackets or whatever could like mimic a guitar, and we would stand on the couch and we would have our parents, sit on the floor, and watch the concert. And then we put on very specifically, I can tell you this, we put on AC/DC's For Those About to Rock We Salute You, which is, the title track of that record. And, it was like, it was like I mean, I'm sure lots of people say this, but it was just sort of like, oh yeah, this is for me. This is what I'm doing. This is it, and it, just and keep in mind too, and this is really important, that, this is the early days of MTV. And my parents, my dad, was a real kind of, he loved his toys and he liked technology, always running around with the earliest, latest technology with video cameras and stuff like that. And I really thank him for that, because it really got me interested in not technology in the way of computers, but in the way of utilizing tools to express yourself, and he was a very expressive guy. So even though he wasn't particularly a musician or anything, but I think he always put me and my brother sort of on stage anyway. Drew, get over this, get next to your brother. Okay, smile. And he was like the director, okay, do this, da, da, da. And I think,
did he put you in talent shows and that sort of thing?
No, he would have encouraged it though. And he did encourage it later in life. He always was a cheerleader for the music. And he was also kind of he was a businessman. So it's to him, it was I don't know why you're only in one band. If you're in 10 other bands, you have more chance of making it. That was his philosophy. And so
I think you fulfill that promise, maybe that was made.
Yeah, but only out of just yeah, I'll play with you guys. Yeah, I'll play with you guys. I was just always eager to do something. And
sure.
Part of it was because nothing I ever put together lasted very long. And that's sort of just it can be just the life cycle of a lot of collaborative projects. They just hit a wall. It's like any relationship. You just hit a point where it's just it's not fun anymore, or you move on, or people move away, or just not there anymore. But yeah. So anyway, AC/DC was that first band, and then MTV, early days MTV. So what I was getting at was my dad, was cable TV. I can watch, the Playboy Channel and all my favorite old movies. And he was a big cinephile. My dad loved movies, and I do too. My brother and I both we spent every weekend in the movie theater. He was really into cinema, and he always knew all the actors. It's all of that guy, and somebody he grew up with watching in the 50s or the 60s. So
what's one of your favorite movies?
Wow. I have a lot, but
it could change in an hour from now, but what's one that comes to mind?
One of my favorite movies, has to be John Carpenter's The Thing.
Heck.
Have you ever seen it?
Have I seen it? I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it as many times as I've been to the Coral Square Mall.
Yes, that many times. Amazing.
Honestly, maybe more now. Yeah, maybe
that
more.
Was good. Funny we're talking about movies. So my dad had no qualms with bringing us into rated R films. I think he kind of looked forward to. I think he thought it was kind of his way of being yeah, fuck you, I'm bringing my kids into this fucking movie. That's what's happening right now. So we saw Scarface in the theater. I can't tell you how many times that a sex scene would come up, and I just felt so weird and uncomfortable. I didn't even know what was going on, and my dad's just elbowing me and I'm just so uncomfortable about it. And but sci-fi horror, that was our thing, man.
Yeah.
Fangoria magazine, and obviously the Star Wars films, and he took me to all those in the theater. When I was very young. He took me to see Airplane in the theater. It's just who takes their kid to see Airplane, which, let's be honest, is a comic gem, but
yes, it is.
In my mind,
did a lot of these did seeing a lot of these movies, and also even some of the scores to some of the film scores. Did any of this have an influence on your music in some of the bands you played with over the years?
Yeah, I think so. It's funny we're talking about Argentina, because it's one of the projects that I've done that really didn't do a whole lot. We just didn't. It just kind of the way the band worked. But Alex, we had become very close friends. So it's two brothers in that band, Alex and Mario, and both just absolute talents, like so talented, these two. And I just saw it and I heard what they were doing. And I just kind of bullied my way into the band. I think I said, I'll play bass. Like, you need a bass player. Let's go. Alex and I we were working a job at the time, and together, and that's how we met. He was playing in a band called Ankle Biter, and then Strikeforce Diablo was happening at that time, like the real early days of that band. And I just like, man, I want to play music with this guy. Like, he's just like, he writes these beautiful songs. I came out of metal, and I came out of hardcore, and I came out of punk rock, and I came out of just like noisy, sludgy, screamy shit. And like, here's this dude that's just like writing like just really pretty music and just like sing. I didn't know a lot of people that could do that, you know? So you mentioned cinema, and like, Alex and I actually worked at a job together where we sold vintage movie posters. It was a mail order business run by this guy that managed movie theaters for many, many, many years and had amassed this collection of like original movie posters. So, seems kind of niche, right? But like collecting records or like collecting comic books or baseball cards, it's a thing.
Right.
And these were the very early days of the internet. So it was just like 96, 97. And we worked at this job together. So I had met him, but I knew he was like in one of the local bands, Ankle Biter, and I liked the band, and we knew each other right away, and we connected over that. We connected over music, we connected over film, we connected, cinema, just a lot of things like that. And he was just so different than anyone I'd ever hung out with in high school. Like, as a high school was my metal dudes, and after high school, my punk rock dudes. And this guy didn't know really come from much of any of that. He's like, hey man, you want to go listen to some Harry Belafonte? I'm just like, what? Harry Belafonte? And then he's like playing. I'm like, oh yeah, I fucking love Harry Belafonte. So, or like U2, we connected over U2. That was a band that we were both, okay, U2, because I'm a big U2 fan. And from my early days of MTV, I mean, in 1981, 82, it's just like,
Yeah,
we were just like on heavy rotation,
totally.
So we came from a very, cinematic place. And Argentina was mostly instrumental. So, and that was sort of, intentional. It's like, let's just make music. And these guys, to be transparent, I think I added an element to it, but the beauty in the music was already there. Like Alex and Mario, just the two of them just had this, like, it's one of those bands. It's one of the bands that I can kind of listen to, that I've been a part of, without judgment, because I feel like I'm a little detached from it, where it's like, if it's something that I was a big part of songwriting wise, I don't even want to listen to it. Like, I get it. I was there, like it kind of like we talked about, I think, off mic, about Johnny Depp never watching his movies or something like that, so It's like, but I can listen to Argentina, I can put that music on. So but again, it's that cinematic thing. I love movie soundtracks, absolutely. I remember buying so, God, this is so random, but when we were young, we loved kind of playing Army, again, child of the early 80s. So it's a lot of Vietnam War films are out, right? That's the Hollywood flavor, I guess. And if you're a 10-year-old boy and you got all this stuff, you love a good action movie. So you're watching Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone, Rambo and shit like that. I remember being at the Yonkers Raceway, and I'm like, do you remember the Yonkers Raceway? Did you ever know that?
No.
Okay, well, I guess you wouldn't. So Yonkers Raceway is just an old dog track that's been a long time. But they used to have a flea market there on the weekends, and I bought the soundtrack to First Blood Part 2. on tape. I think I actually still have it, and it's just like, was like, yeah, cool, man. Like I own a piece of this awesome movie, and it's just so ridiculous.
I don't remember who did the score for that movie.
Yeah, right. Well, it wasn't John Williams, and it definitely was not Hans Zimmer. So, are you saying you actually do know who did the score for the movie?
I feel like it's on the tip of my tongue, but
Get out
we might. I am somewhat knowledgeable about film scores as well, but it's not coming right at me. But I do remember though that soundtrack, and of course the movie. How many times did a child of the '80s see the Rambo movies?
I know, so kind of ridiculous. But I did feel like, look, it's like any cinematic experience, and this is more of a movie conversation. But I mean, so much. The music does so much, and that's just the power of music does so much. I mean, like I forgot why it hit my brain the other day, but I was walking down the street and I was thinking about this, the movie Superman from 1978, Christopher Reeve Superman, and I was thinking about John Williams' score.
That's John Williams for sure.
Yeah, and coming off the back of Star Wars, of course, and I was thinking about that, bum 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 bum, just like that build, and then like that crescendo to like this triumphant release, and Superman, fuck, there you go. I got it out. I got my fuck out. Sorry, that's inside.
I think that might be the second one or third one.
Oh, okay, cool. Cool. You're like a clicker off camera, but again, it's the power of music. Just that, the build and the release, and like it was always just a journey for me. It's like any song I heard that really hit me was just always like it was just a book or a movie, unto itself. And then you take an album and you're like, whoa, okay, these are chapters,
right?
Chapters of a book, And
I did get that vibe from the Argentina music that was released. I did get a cinematic vibe to the sound, because again, some of it was instrumental, which kind of remind you a little bit of like a film score in a way. And then it was just way more just chill vibe. Like it could be in the background and just to create a mood,
Yeah. I mean, that was how those guys rolled. And, it was good stuff. It was good stuff. I was really happy to get out of South Florida, though, I have to say. Like, I have just, I don't want to say trauma, but like, man, like, I guess when I started, I mean, high school, I think in those years was really tough for me. There just wasn't a lot of really, if you liked, and again, I know this has got to be the way how it is for teenagers, period, but, I feel like living in a small town, if you want to call it a small town, or just somewhat isolated from culture, because that was the first thing that I noticed coming down there from New York City. It was just completely isolated. It was a very different experience. Like, like I felt right away that I was missing out. I was like, oh man, I'm going to spend my teenage years down here. Like, dude, so what are we going to do? Just run around like construction sites and I don't know, like
I know a lot of kids who, especially growing up, and you might listen to more edgy music, like punk, thrash, whatever. Did you skateboard at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, admittedly, I wasn't as good at it as some of my friends. I was kind of overweight, and that I think kind of held me back from a lot of things. At least my level of confidence. In terms of sports, in terms of being hyperactive. I think I kind of fell more in love with the BMX bike. So I had like the GT Pro Performer with like the mag wheels, but yeah. We did that stuff, and for sure, 100%. We'd jump our bikes into like the swimming pool. I remember seeing a movie called Hesher not long ago and had like Metallica on the soundtrack. It was like one of the first movies I'd ever seen with Metallica on the soundtrack. It's like, that's odd. But this guy like jumps a BMX bike into the pool. And I'm like, dude, I totally did that. That's some total Florida shit right there. Like, yeah. And, I was lucky, I feel like there's just so much to talk about that builds up to like my music stuff. But, and I'm happy that, anyone would want to hear it. But, um, I was very fortunate, I think, I lived in an apartment complex. It was just, I feel like it was nothing but like divorced moms, it was nothing but latchkey kids. It was nothing but like single mothers doing their best to try and like keep it together for their kids. And I remember seeing it sometimes, like seeing like a friend's mom in the neighborhood break down or just kind of be like off or be drunk before I even really knew what drunk was or whatever it was. Like just felt like, man, like I look back now and I'm just like, oh my God, like all these women were suffering and my mother was totally suffering, and she was just like doing everything she could to keep us like fed and to keep us occupied and to encourage us as best she could, which really wasn't much. So we would come home from school, middle school, where I met we moved into this when we first moved to Florida. We met these guys in this apartment complex and met a crew of guys, of kids. We were 12. And I was so looking back, just so grateful for having met them because we had each other. Like we came home from school. There's no mom around. There's no parents. There's no dinner. Like if it didn't go in the microwave, it didn't get eaten. That was it. Or it was like bowls of cereal. So we'd come home and rather than like, I don't know, sit alone somewhere, we had this apartment complex to just meet up after school in the apartment complex by the pool area or downstairs from our apartments. And the bikes would come out, the skateboards would come out, the little push scooters would come out, whatever it was. And we would just, spend the whole evening doing something, playing tag or chase or playing football or jumping in the pool. And then, one of the older guys, would like come out with, some, boombox and play some like crazy metal. And we're like, oh, what is that? And I think that was the first time I was really exposed to like really heavy music, first time I'd ever heard Metallica. And I remember hearing it and being like, dude, I didn't know guitarists could do that. It was so scary. And then Slayer and shit like that. And just like, so that definitely led to, a whole, it really opened me up to a lot of music outside of pop music because, the early 80s, Madonna, AC/DC, Def Leppard, Michael Jackson. I mean, they were all under one roof, really. It was just, whatever was on MTV. But to hear stuff that wasn't, like Iron Maiden or Metallica or stuff like that, Slayer, that's really where, music took a different turn for me. And that's when I decided I want to play guitar. So that's when I picked up a guitar. I was about 14. My mom had bought me a guitar at a store. I don't know if it was around in your day, Jeff, but it was called F Sharp Music.
I don't remember it.
It was on Sample Road. Remember Sample Road?
Of course.
Sample Road. And it was just in one of those little shopping plazas there. And I wanted a guitar that looked like Kirk Hammett from Metallica. It's like whatever looked like the guitar he had on the poster that's in my room. I want that guitar, Mom. And I picked out this Kramer. God, man, I wish I still had this guitar, man. I just completely gave it away to a friend, like in pieces. I think I took it apart for fun and never put it back together. But yeah, it was like this flying V, flying V, but it was what they called an angle V. So it had this short point and this one long point that went out, and it was a Kramer. And I'm just like, and Kramer in 1987 was like a big brand of guitar. They were the rock brand of guitar. At least I think the affordable brand. I don't know. But and then some big rockers played Kramer or whatever. But So that was my first guitar. And yeah, it was I was just lucky because, my buddy Tim picked up a bass. He lived right in that same apartment complex with me. And we would start playing together, and then we'd watch MTV, and then we'd, okay, what t-shirt is, the dude from Metallica wearing? Oh, he's wearing a Faith No More shirt. Who's this band, Faith No More? I don't know, but we got to find it. So we would go down to this record store. Man, this is like I told you, man, it's all gonna be about Coral Springs. We would go down to this record store that was in Margate, so like a town or two over, Margate, and it was in a shopping mall there, plaza there, and it was a store called Record Haven. And yeah, we had some record stores obviously in the Coral Square Mall, which I know you're really passionate about, but
I'd been to the Specs and the Camelot in the mall.
right, Specs. Yeah. Oh man, I actually had a friend that worked at Specs in my later teen years, but Record Haven was awesome because Record Haven had it all. It had all the weird underground metal shit. It had the punk rock stuff. You'd walk in there and there'd just be like, what's going on here? And I think at this time I was really into comic books and like in my early teens. And, I was just hearing new music, and I just could go on and on about all this stuff. But
was this around the same time though? It was like the time frame you're talking about. Is this around the same time when you discovered local music as well from Florida?
Yeah. In a roundabout way, yes, because I started taking guitar lessons from a guy that lived in Coral Springs. He played in a local band, and they were a local metal band. And the name of the band was called Ambugalard. Does this at all ring a bell? It shouldn't. I mean, it kind of shouldn't, but I wouldn't expect it to. Any of the older guys that, I say older guys, but anybody that, I don't know, who knows what. But anyway, I took guitar lessons with this guy. His name was Dan, and Dan was really into Star Wars. Now, mind you, this was like between Star Wars films. So Star Wars wasn't like a thing anymore. It was way, there hadn't been a Star Wars, movie since, the early 80s. It's like there wasn't any there weren't any toys really in production, but he collected old Star Wars toys. And I had all these old Star Wars figures. So I would trade him Star Wars figures for guitar lessons. And, he was a metal dude. So of course, we're kind of, we're trying to shred basically what's happening. And I would go see his band play, that they were kind of like local heroes. In fact, the other guitar player he was in my high school. And this guy, Jordy, went on to play with Marilyn Manson for a long time. But so these were guys in my high school, whatnot.
Where were you seeing them play? What venues? Clubs?
God. In those days, it was like this weird biker bar off Dixie Highway called the Treehouse, and it was like in Hallandale. I mean, I remember going there, and we'd go there because we were, they would let underage kids in, like we'd carry their amps in and go see him, and then there'd be like a little fucking mosh pit or whatever, and then like all these other weird metal bands would come up, and I remember seeing this one band play. And this has kind of sort of shifted my perspective a little bit. Now, okay, the name of this band kind of says it all, but the name of the band that they played with that night was called Nazi Satan. I know, it's just like ridiculous, right? Nazi Satan. That was the name of the band. Never
Very
saw
clever.
them again. What?
Very clever.
Yeah, very clever. Exactly. But never saw them again. But these guys were like playing with these metal bands, but they were like punk rock. They were a punk rock band. And looking back now, having listened to a lot more music, I mean, they were pulling from the Ramones, they were pulling from the Sex Pistols, stuff like that. So I hadn't really heard anything like that before. That was a different thing. I mean, I heard, Rock the Casbah on MTV in the early 80s, but never really like what I guess we'd consider kind of quintessential, punk rock. But I loved it. I was just like, dude, this is something different. It's not the chugga chugga. It's something else, and it's like far more angrier, and it's just, I feel like it has something way more important to say, perhaps. So strangely enough, I can't believe I'm talking about that band. It didn't even occur to me until this conversation.
That's good. That's good to
that
hear.
night at the Treehouse, going there to see a band called Vanbuilderass, my guitar teacher's band. They played with another band called Panic, and they were another kind of thrash metal band. And the drummer of that band worked at a record store called Uncle Sam's. And
which one?
The one that he worked at was the one in a good question, by the way. Which one exactly?
There was Lauderhill, there was Pompano, and there was Miami. I assume Lauderhill or Pompano.
There was 3. Yeah, no, he was the one in Lauderhill. And that's when I would go to, because my senior year I lived in Tamarack, and it was much closer. So, and by then it was just like music. So I lived at that Uncle Sam's. I hung out there, and we wound up befriending the guy. And even though he was, older than we were, he'd always just turn us on to, oh, you got to check this out, check that. So there was a lot of music that came our way out, through him for sure. And just through hanging out there, because it wasn't just him, he was the metal guy, right? But then there was the goth girl, and then there was like the punk dude. Like there was, it's like for every genre that was represented in the store, there was that one employee that just totally,
I was living in Tamarack at the time that I would frequent Uncle Sam's. I would ride my bike there at least once or twice a week, and because I had no other way of getting there. And some of the people you're describing, it's like it was yesterday. I remember I don't remember their names, but I remember what they looked like, and you just saw the same people all the time, and they were all different. And if you talk to one, they'd tell you something else. The other one would get you just recommend another type of music, and it was great for that purpose.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the alternative record store, like a real record store where you have that social element, is so important. And I was so grateful to have that. And like I said, I was friends with some guys that had older brothers, and they were friends with those guys, so we could kind of hang with this slightly older crew, and just get exposed to so much more. And then I think when it came down to like local bands, these were just more of like really just starting to dip my toe into going to shows and seeing other bands. But, we had, there was a local band, there's a band in our, and there was a bunch of kids in our high school that, just were like in the bands. They were just the guys in the bands. And my locker in the last couple of years of high school was next to this guy named Pete Gordon. And Pete, super cool dude, but I felt like he was just like way cooler than me. Like he was just saying all this crazy stuff, and he smoked weed, and he would just show up in like, Bob Marley shirts and like tie-dye shirts, but he'd also, was playing in a punk band. I don't know if it was Radio Baghdad at that point. Radio Baghdad was definitely like one of the first punk bands. Like it was guys that I went to high school with that were my age or whatever, that were playing in a band. And I mean, that for me was like, I want to do that. They're doing it. I can do that. I want to do that. And the drummer, this guy, Chris Goldbach, Spiky, just sick drummer, and I wasn't really tight with these guys, like they were so much cooler than I was. I just they were just too shy. I was super, super, super shy in high school. And, but like, I just knew like whatever they were doing, like I just really needed to be a part of it. So I picked up a guitar, and that's kind of when that really started happening. And then, fast forward high school, I get out of high school, and then it becomes like, oh, I just want to learn how to play guitar. I just want to start a band. So me and my high school friend, Craig, started playing music together. I had moved out into my own apartment. I was going to community college at Broward Community College, working at like this pizza place in Margate. and everything was just
I went to
about
BCC too. There's another
yes.
common bond.
Dude, I mean, I know like there's a slight age difference here, but we walked the same
We've
sidewalks.
walked some of the same sidewalks. Yes, we have.
Yeah, that's I love that. And I almost kind of feel like we're neglect, like we're just having this inside conversation, and like, people are gonna be like, Tamarack, what the fuck is a Tamarack? So and my answer to them would be like, well, you don't really want to know. But yeah, so playing in bands like really helped me kind of just get out of my shell and just made me feel kind of like I could contribute something, like I had value and I could be a part of something. And crazy enough, the guys that I grew up with, the friends that I made very early on in high school were all on the same page. So even though we weren't the cool kids, and we had each other, and that was super helpful to me. And I'm still very close with a lot of those guys. Like we still, my God, I mean, 40 years later. No,
Yeah.
more than 40
More
years
than
later.
more than 40
Something like
years.
that. Wait, no,
Yeah.
I'm not eight.
Don't count. Yeah, don't
Yeah,
even
35.
count. Don't even count.
Let's call it 35
It'll
years,
make you feel bad. Don't count.
Yeah, I know. But I'm grateful for it, man. I'm thankful for it. And they're awesome dudes. Like they're guys that play music. They do, they're tattooers, they're artists. They just do amazing shit. And it's just like makes me feel like, okay, like we were total outcasts, and that's where we were meant to be, and
Sure.
it just made me feel like really good, because I never felt like I was never good at sports, the team thing. I spent a lot of time by myself in my bedroom.
Was
So,
that first early band that you were kind of getting into? Was that Gus?
Gus, yeah. So Craig and I started playing in Gus. I met Craig in 10th grade. And it's funny. It's like, it was really all about CDs. Like CDs were coming affordable and popular, and it was about the sound quality. So I remember trading a whole bunch of vinyl records that I had. Wait, I think maybe it was another guy, but I remember selling Craig a bunch of records. But we would do that. We'd buy and sell records. We were really into records, even, and we'd go to record shows together. Funny, I was looking through my records and I still have this Black Sabbath record, the first Black Sabbath record, signed by Ozzy. Not, I think, that I bought at a record show that me and Craig went to. That was like in Lauderhill or something like that. Anyway, just a lot of so Craig and I started playing in Gus. We started, this band. We knew we wanted to be kind of like, at the time, I mean, this is now like, 92, it was about, we wanted to be something that was kind of fast and poignant. I'm not gonna say political, because I don't think I was so much political, but we wanted to be, I wanted to have something to say, so Bad Religion was a huge influence at that time. And the other influence was Helmet. So it was just like, dude, we need to start a band that's like Bad Religion meets Helmet. I just remember
that sounds like a pretty good mix right there.
Yeah, I think so too. Like heavy, but also fast,
Totally. Where the name Gus? Because where that name come from?
It's nonsense. I honestly, we just couldn't come up with a name, and our buddy Tim, who's a guy I mentioned earlier, was over. He was playing in the band at the time called Bingo Mutt, which was like this punk ska type.
Yeah.
And my roommate at the time, my very first apartment, my dear friend Ravi, he played in the band too, Bingo Mutt. And they're punk ska type band. And I remember Tim just like, why don't you just like call it like somebody's name, like Phil or Steve, just because it's funny. I'm like, Steve, like call my band Steve. And then I'm just like, well, how about Gus? Like, at least that sounds like heavy. To me, it sounded heavy. It sounded like a old man, just like a grumpy old man. So,
just the ironic thing is that there was another band in Canada who had the same name. I don't know which one came first, but there was a Gus in Canada too that you later did a split with.
Yeah. So fast forward, Gus started playing out, and we started playing up in Gainesville, and that was really a huge turning point for me with music, was discovering that town and discovering people there. And Ron, the bass player of Gus, he had a lot of friends. He was really tight with the guys in a band. And this was another actually really influential South Florida band, Load, who I'm still to this day just absolutely love. And when I started playing in bands, when I started becoming, like a little more involved, they were one of the first bands that just blew my mind. Like they were so good and just had this just fucking raucous energy. And it had metal and it had Nirvana in it, and it had Bad Brains in it, and it had Ramones in it. It had it all. So we would go see Load anytime we could.
Where were you? What venue were you seeing them play the most?
Churchill's was like, that was our CBGBs, man. Churchill's was the spot. And, other places like the Plus 5 Lounge in Davie would have shows. I feel like it was an old, like, dying rocker strip bar, but they would have a lot of good shows. We would play there. A lot of touring bands would play there. And I saw a lot of good shows actually at the Plus 5. That was a great spot. And it was at a big, parking lot. It was in like a plaza off of, I'm guessing 441 or something like that. And so it could be a good hang. And that was part of it too. Like, I think of going to a lot of shows where we just hang out in the parking lot, and that was part of it. It was like, so, and then sometimes you went in, sometimes you didn't. Sometimes you didn't have money to get in, it's just like, so that was definitely kind of part of the social element. But
what do you remember from the first
track? But
that's okay. What do you remember from the first demo that Gus recorded?
Yeah,
where did you record it, and what do you remember from that?
So the demo, the first Gus demo, and that was my first time ever in a recording studio, and we recorded at a studio that was like, I think it was in Boca or Deerfield Beach. Somewhere in there, maybe like, Coral Springs. I don't remember, but somewhere in that North Broward area. And it was called Livewire Studios. And it was a full-on like rocker metal spot. And we were going to record 3 songs. I don't know how we wound up there. They had rehearsal spaces there too, like where you could literally just like, go in and play on drums. And I think we did that a couple of times where they had equipment there. But then they had a full-fledged like, recording studio. And so this is interesting. At the time, this was very early on in the days of the band. Excuse me. And we didn't really have a permanent member. So the bass player of the band was our friend Matt Fox. He was actually, I guess technically you could say he was the first member of the band, right? Matt went on to do like more metal hardcore bands like Shai Hulud. That was his thing. Like that's still his thing, I believe. Like he's like probably the only surviving member of the band. And at the time, and Matt is, I'm going back, 1993 here. I probably haven't talked to him since 1995, at least not in person, but he was such a talented dude. Like this guy could rip guitar. You just saw him. He's just like a machine. And then he could play really fast. Drums. He was like a sick drummer, just super fast. And we hung out a lot in those days. And it was great hanging out with him because we would argue like crazy. Matt was like a debater, and he was someone that loved to analyze songs. And God, I have this memory. I'm sorry, man. Am I going off on a tangent here? I don't know if I'm going the wrong direction. But I have very fond memories of hanging out with Matt.
Yeah,
everything was a philosophical conversation, and it was critical. Like we were fucking critical about the music. Like this sucks, and I got to this thing where I really loved kind of pushing his buttons. So sometimes I would create like little arguments. I would. That sounds terrible to say. Use the word gaslight because it's not what it was, not at all what it was, but we would, I just loved to get him into an argument, but we loved Dead Milkmen and we loved Fugazi. And,
so you think, is that what kind of brought you all together, was just a lot of similar interests for some of the bands?
100%. And cinema. Yeah. Matt was actually a brilliant actor. a really good actor, and we both loved cinema and movies because my dad was such a cinephile that I just got that from him. So all throughout high school was just like, oh, Taxi Driver, Scorsese, I went through a French New Wave period, whatever it was, just like just getting into so much. And we would see tons of movies anyway. But the first Gus, so he played on the first Gus stuff, and then yeah, that recording experience was crazy because like it just like never been in there before. The guy recording us was just like couldn't be bothered, he just like didn't care what we were doing. And we had like one kind of fast punk rock song, and then one I really loved Jesus Lizard. That was a band that I really loved. So I really loved dissonant chords, and Dwayne Dennison, he was a favorite guitar player of mine. I just loved how he would just bend notes, bend strings, out of tune with each other to create like a new chord. And I really love doing that and try to, incorporate that into the music at the time. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was just our first demo. I mean, I was excited, like to me, I never thought I'd get that far. It wasn't even really about, oh, I want to be a rock star. It was just, I just want to write a song. And then you write a song. Okay, I just want to jam with like one other dude. You jam with one other person. And then it's like, I want to record something. I want to play out. It's like you set these small little kind of milestones or goals. And I never thought, I would get to travel. I never thought I would get to put out lots of music. I never thought anyone would care about what I have to do or say. So, that was, and to be honest, I don't care. To be honest, I really don't. And I never did. And that's to a fault. So like, I probably should. All I cared about was how much I liked something, and if you didn't like it, then maybe I'll probably wind up liking it more, So I used to tend to kind of be a little.
I like that attitude, Drew.
Well, it hasn't always served me, like I can be quite contrarian sometimes, and it's sometimes to a fault. And that came from just going to a fucking, really lame fucking high school, with
Caravella you went to, right?
Yeah. And just like the teachers, I just remember looking at me with this disdain. I think what really set me on my path in terms of how I think looked at myself. God, I feel like, is this therapy? Are you my therapist? I had this.
Not tonight.
Yeah. Okay. You're off tonight.
I am.
That's right. I forgot. You're off the clock. But yeah, I think when you kind of realize that you're sort of you just don't fit in with everybody. It's like there are just these moments that kind of tell you. And I'm not saying like, oh yeah, man, I don't fit in. I'm like, I don't know. It's not like that. It's just like, you feel like you're doing something wrong. And I think a lot of people that are artists, a lot of people that are musicians, and specifically people that I think find counterculture experiences, they just feel like they don't belong somewhere. I mean, that's a cliche, everybody knows that, and I knew I just didn't belong. And, I'd showed up to school as my 11th grade year, and I was a really big fan of the band Voivod. I'm still a big Voivod fan. And I shaved my head like the bass player. He had this really cool, he had long hair, but he had this, like half of his side was just bald. I was like, oh, that's so badass. And I saw his video on Headbangers Ball, and I'm like, dude, I'm totally doing it. So I did it, and I show up to class, and I show up to my history teacher's class, this guy, Mr. Carson. I'll never forget this guy. And I could go on about him, but I'll keep it simple. He would just constantly say about, man, I fought in Vietnam. You kids don't know how lucky you have it. Blah, blah, blah. You've never been in a foxhole filled with fucking diarrhea. Have you been in a foxhole filled with diarrhea? I've been in a foxhole filled with diarrhea. Like he would say this to the class.
He sounds like Professor Ferguson and Back to School. Remember that scene in Back to School with Sam
Kinison?
Yeah, that's it. Just reminds me of that which is going on and on about Vietnam and stuff like that. So
oh man, like I don't think that scene would not fly today.
No, probably.
I don't think Sam Kinison would fly today.
I don't think a lot of things fly today.
No, but he wasn't like that. No, he was very like demeanor and very like, you could cross, and like all his clothes super pressed, and like his hair like like totally, like, but like totally shopping at like Walmart, like big butterfly collar, like even in like the late 80s. Like, how's that happening? So, this guy, made me stand up in front of the class that day. And he's like, he saw me come in and he just like looked down and he just, did one of these, like rubbing his eyes. And I wasn't a troublemaker. I was quiet as a church mouse in class. I didn't really pay attention. I didn't really care, but I didn't make problems. Anyway, he's just like, he's like, Drew, before we get started, I just want to, I just want to address the class something. And like I say, this is precursor. He just complained all the time about, kids today, blah, 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 blah. He just all the time, just be really weird. He would like, if you were sleeping, he would like throw a wadded up piece of paper at you. And he'd be like, he's like, you are so lucky that's not a hand grenade. Do you know what it's like to have a hand grenade thrown at you? Like, he would talk about his Vietnam experience.
Right.
I clearly had like PTSD. So he made me stand up in front of class and he just said, this is what's wrong with this country. And I fight for this. I fought for this. And he's like pointing at me and he made me stand up. And, I tried to like shake it off and I stood on my chair and I'm just like, I just did something stupid and I sat back down, with half of my head shaved, and like all these just like, just like cookie cutter people are all just like, ugh, and then it's just like, it was partially traumatizing, but I think the very next day, a dude who sat in the back of the class was like, dude, you're fucking awesome, man. And he was this guy, Dave or something like that. And he's just like, man, I love metal and I love punk rock and I love Satan. He's like, and I know you love Satan. And I'm like, but I wound up being friends with this guy because he just thought like, I'm like, okay, you're not them. So whatever you are, at least we're not them. So that was my Coral Springs experience in a nutshell. And for the most part, and I
really came full circle there, Drew.
Yeah, I had to button up Coral Springs, but when I started playing music and hanging out in Miami Beach, hanging out in South Florida, hanging out in Miami, seeing shows at like Washington Square was a great place. What else was down? Oh, Churchill's obviously. Club New, we'd see bands play. Where else?
What is your
Theater? Oh my God, the Cameo Theater. Just like, just started getting outside of Coral Springs and doing other things and playing in bands. It was huge. And, I'm sorry. What were you going to say? Sorry, I guess it could all be about South Florida.
That actually was going to be my question, because as you were getting outside of Broward and then going down to Miami-Dade, a whole different world down there, and a lot of different clubs and stuff, and other bands that may not have made it as much to Broward that were more playing in that part of South Florida. So what kind of impact did that have on you as well?
Like, well, huge. I mean, like seeing bands that, take them out of the arena context, and then, like the bigger rock shows that I had seen, and then seeing things in small clubs and just the impact that has over you, is a whole different other thing. But when I started playing music and started playing in these clubs, there wasn't really a lot going on. Like kids really had to kind of make it happen down there. And there were a few promoters that were like our age that would like have shows and make it happen. And I was never one of those people, I just didn't have that thing. I was never like, I never created a zine. I never had a label. I never booked shows really, but I was always very, very grateful for those that were doing it because I just didn't know how to do that sort of thing. And I didn't really have the disposition for it. So, one of the really cool places that I remember that was really stand out was a record store called Far Out Records. So this guy, Tim, and his girlfriend, I think they're still together, wife, maybe Lisa, who I remember was a hairstylist. So she made like really good money, you know. And he had opened this awesome record store, you know, and it was kind of where you know, he started doing shows. It started where I bought I remember buying some records that were really, really inspiring to me as a guitar player and as a maker of songs and such. You know, I bought those records there in the early 90s. And you know, bands like Jawbreaker were really big influence. Bands like Jawbox, big influence. Quicksand, really huge influence on me at that time. And you know, Far Out Records was a great place. You know, it was a really awesome record store, and Tim was a super great guy and very inclusive. You know, he liked what he liked, and maybe Gus was kind of on the fringe of that. We weren't like a punk ska band, and we weren't like a straight edge hardcore band, but he started doing shows in his store moved. It was originally up on Oakland Park Boulevard in this little plaza right before you got over the Intercoastal or there, I think, and then or some little canal or whatever before you got over to like that Wilton Manors area, and then it moved to like Dixie Highway between I think like Broward, and it was just there's another place over there at the time called the Mud House, which was like a coffee shop. And between Far Out Records and the Mud House, you know, you had like a cool little hang spot. There was this little plaza. It was kind of like the architecture was like in this. It's a really cool. I hope it's still standing because the building itself or the plaza itself, I think architecturally was really cool. It would just had this kind of old Spanish architecture vibe, and it kind of overlooked onto this courtyard kind of a thing. At least that's how I remember it. And so he started putting on shows there, and Gus played one show there. And this is kind of like really, you know, this is really when I decided, we hadn't really talked about this, but really decided South Florida was not for me anymore for a lot of reasons. Like as a person, it wasn't for me. And as a music, I hate, you know, I never really use the term musician, but as a dude in a band, it was never really, I realized it wasn't for me anymore. There was a shooting there at a show, and I'm trying to remember the bands. I feel bad I don't remember the bands, but it's like us. I think Bingo Mutt. I think a straight edge hardcore band called Tension might have played. And maybe a few other bands. That was, you know, it was so eclectic because like there wasn't one scene down there, but we were all kind of in that scene. Or you play with like some kind of like Jane's Addiction wannabe band or Red Hot Chili Peppers wannabe band or something. And it was totally cool. Like you just played with bands, you know, or like some Pearl Jam wannabe band. There was a band down there that we used to play with. It's kind of Pearl Jammy. But it was cool. Like, you know, it's just like, you know, what else we have here? So this particular night, you know, there was some guys rolled up, and this was, dude, I mean, this was late 80s, in my perspective, late 80s and early 90s in South Florida. I mean, you could say it's about anywhere, really, New York, any of the big cities, but it was very violent. And the shows were always very violent. Like, I don't think there was ever a show I didn't go to where somebody didn't get pepper sprayed or somebody didn't get beat up. Somebody's shoes didn't get taken off them because they were Doc Martens. You know, there's just always like guys just like wanting to beat up other guys. And like there's a points where like, you know, rival, you know, gangs is not the right word, but rivals would show up, you know, at the shows to fight. Like that's, you're showing up to a presentation of art to fight. Like that's your battleground. Okay, interesting. But I get it. I mean, you know, the music has a violence to it, and the dancing has a violence to it. So I think that maybe kind of just comes with the territory.
Do you think think there was a certain band though that was on the bill that may have brought out more of those type of people?
No, I mean, no. In those days, you just came out. I mean, if it was punk rock, if it was hardcore, if it would kind of just meld between those worlds,
yeah,
you know, we did not ever fit like we fit at all. You know, we just weren't really pulling from too much of that. So we were always kind of like odd man out, I think, in that particular world. We weren't a fast punk rock band. We might have had more grungy elements than anything, to be honest. You know, I'm a huge Nirvana fan, and you know, we haven't really touched on the impact of that band on me, but that was pretty huge too. Like, you know, just seeing like you could write these incredibly beautiful songs with so much, you know, so much velocity, so much anger and so much emotion. And and everybody felt that way. It didn't matter who you were. Smells Like Teen Spirit came out, and that just started a whole other thing. I mean, everybody knows that, but
Sure.
even within that world, it was so. Right before this particular show, we had just played in Gainesville for the first time, and that was a real eye-opening experience for me, because I'd never been to a college town. I just never knew a place like that existed. And admittedly, okay, but Gainesville at that time was just such a place of like, I mean, I guess it's a really stupid analogy or comparison, but I guess like if you were a rocker and you wanted to be the next Motley Crue, and you stepped off the bus in LA on a Sunset Strip in 1983 or 4 or 5, that would be the equivalent for me at that time, showing up, because No Idea Records was doing stuff. I was paying attention to things that were coming out of Gainesville through No Idea. We had a really great record store in North Miami called Open Books and Records. And they always carried No Idea, a lot of indie stuff. We had Y&T down on Bird Road, which is a really great record store. My mom would take us down there to go record shopping there, and they would have a whole they would arrange the records by labels. Like they would say, oh, this, I remember seeing I think when it come out, Fugazi, Steady Diet of Nothing, which was a very influential record for me. It's like, oh, Discord Records and this records and, SST Records and Touch and Go Records. And so who cares? Why are you mentioning the record label, And I think that's when I started paying attention to that. And so Gainesville, we played up in Gainesville. We had a just incredible time. And Gus, we played with a band. We played with Cavity, which was a Miami band.
Right.
We played with a bunch. Yeah, awesome.
Where was it at? What venue?
It was at the Hardback Cafe, which arguably was like the CBGBs of Gainesville.
Yeah.
You could argue really the CBGBs of North Florida. It was just a really fantastic venue with a very rich history in music, and that was the first place I ever played up there. And it was really great too, because some of my friends in Bingo Mutt were playing some punk ska thing, and I think they came up to hang out. I don't remember how it went, but yeah, we went up there. We played with Cavity. We played with a band from there called Utility. And Utility, I wound up becoming, and still I'm incredibly close friends with the guy who was in Utility, because we wound up, playing in Strikeforce Diablo together. Matt Sweeting. So I met Matt through Ron, and Matt was a guy that booked shows. We were actually, the show we were at, we were seeing Floor play at Churchill's, and this was in December of 1993. And I remember because I recently combed through some old flyers and saw it. But Gus played that show which at Churchill's, and he introduced me to Matt. It's like, oh, this is my friend Matt. He plays in a band Utility. They're up in Gainesville. They want us to come up and play. And I was like, oh, great. So the very next month, January of 94, we went up there and played, and we played with Cavity. We played with Utility. Gosh, who was the other band we played with? Yeah, I think it was Gus, Cavity, Utility. Maybe that was it. We had the Hardback Cafe, and we got paid $100, and we each got like a quart of Mickey's Ice. And that was like a popular beer at the time, Mickey's. Like, it's not even around anymore, I don't think, but it was a quart. We didn't have 40s in Florida. We had quarts. So, and I didn't even drink at the time at all. So I just gave mine away. But it was awesome. Like, kids cared. Everybody's like wearing like cool t-shirts. Like, oh man, like, I don't know. Just, it was our tribe. It was like our scene. South Florida, we just never felt like we fit. I didn't. Not with, what was happening there. This was like way, in my opinion, like advanced. Like, it was for a lot of like like thinkers. I mean, to go on and on about my experience in Gainesville is obviously another 5-hour conversation.
But it was
That
it was important though, a very
it
important
was
part of your
super
life.
important.
It helped to shape who you are in probably more ways than one. And yeah, so the the time that you were playing up in Gainesville, you mentioned how it was more your tribe. The audience, the kids that were coming out to see you play, talk about the difference between that and maybe some of the gigs you had in South Florida.
Well, um, I mean, it was just no violence. I mean, that was the first thing. I was like, dude, like everybody's just like having a good time. And I think there was a lot more of a feminine energy there. You know, I mean, girls were in the front watching the bands. And I really liked that. Like everyone was involved. It felt communal. You know, South Florida just felt like, you know, kind of I feel like how a lot of people view Florida was just like this every man for himself gladiator pit, you know, and that's what the music was like in South Florida for me. Like, but in Gainesville, everyone was there. It's like, are you guys like all best friends? Like, what's going on right now? Like, this is crazy. So the lack of violence, the tremendous generosity, you know, feeding the bands, being stoked to brought bands there, paying the bands well, you know, for, you know, $100 then was that was insane. Like, you know, and everybody's just digging the music and you weren't playing at like the Rock Solid or the Plus Five Lounge, some like dilapidated old strip club. And that's really what it was. A lot of the venues we played back then were just old strip clubs, you know, like, or old like rocker metal bars that just like, you know, needed to pay the rent. So they let these knuckleheads in there, you know?
You mentioned Strikeforce Diablo, and I think definitely want to get into your time with that band and still playing, you know, here and there, right? You've done some reunion shows, and that was, I mean, I was familiar with Gus, but Strikeforce Diablo was the first band that you were in that really just hooked me. And you mentioned the influence of like Fugazi and some of the Discord bands. That's what it reminded me of. Like there was an influence of that sound of Discord. So was that a big influence of Strikeforce Diablo? And maybe take us through how that band got started and your, you know, some of your good memories of Strikeforce.
Yeah. So, you know, when Gus as a band decided to pack up and leave Fort Lauderdale, you know, we'd already gone on like a couple of tours. We had done a 2-month tour with Matt, who wound up playing in Strikeforce, who's in Strikeforce, and is a very, very dear friend of mine. You know, we went on, did a 2-month tour with his band, Tired From Now On, that summer of 1995. And then Gus did another kind of East Coast thing. And we came back and we're just like, man, let's just get out of here. We're coming to Gainesville. Like, this is where we belong. And, you know, we can tour, we can put out records. No Idea Records is here. Like, come on, it was crazy. Like, all our friends are here. My girlfriend at the time was going to college. She was going to UF. So I had, we were dating when she was still in high school, and she was now going to UF. And so Gainesville just became just this incredible place. I spent so much time up there visiting to play and visiting to see my girlfriend at the time, Kim, and it's just where we wanted to be. So we got up there, and very soon after we got there, Ron just didn't. Well, two things happened. So Sam quit the band. Our drummer at the time, Sam, quit, and it was kind of heartbreaking. And I could talk a lot about that because Sam was and is still a very close friend, but he was he was like the first really amazing musician I'd ever played with. You know, he was like a real drummer. Like, this guy's seasoned. He's older. He's played with so many other bands. Like, this guy, he used to play in a really great band called the Holy Terrors. And well, you spoke with Rob Elba, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, dude, the guy, I have tons of respect for that man. Like, really influential band. And when I heard that, you know, Sam from Holy Terrors want to play with me and Ron. Like that was like, because we would kind of juggle drummers for a while. My old friend Craig moved to San Francisco, and that was really exciting. Like, because he's a sick drummer. He's still a sick drummer. He plays in Interpol, and they kill it. Phenomenal band, and he's obviously been doing that band now for 20 years. And he just elevated the music. I felt like, okay, this can't be just like some like Helmet Beats meets Bad Religion shit anymore. Like we really need to start, I want to become a great band. And I started writing a lot. I started reading a lot, and I started really working on lyrics. That became very important to me. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just saying things. I didn't care if I said important things. It was just more about, what was coming out, and the use of the English language was something creative on top of the music. So, and Sam brought a lot of that out in me because he was just more mature. I was super shy. I hadn't really been with too many ladies, and this guy, he was just very mature, very worldly to me. And he introduced me to my first cappuccino, and he would tour, like, he would come on the road with an espresso maker and like a paper bag. That was like a thing he would do. And I just thought that was very adult.
Yeah.
I'd be happy with like Dunkin' Donuts with like, half milk and like 10 sugars, So he introduced me to good coffee and just like good food and a lot of great music too. Sam is an absolute Encyclopedia Britannica of music and culture. So he was just really influential, and we would just sit and listen to music. So we packed it up. We came to Gainesville, but soon after, I get sidetracked really easy, Jeff. I'm sorry, man. I see why these things get to be 3 hours long.
but there are so many people who have been there on this journey that you have connected with or were influential to you or whatever it may have been. So it's great to be able to hear some of those stories and some of those connections. And Sam has been brought up on the podcast many times, especially when Rob was on, of course, because we talked a lot about the Holy Terrors.
Yeah. That makes, of course. Yeah. And that makes total sense. And it's nice to, I guess maybe, intentionally you bring up some characters that were just, came along that really helped to steer the boat, and sometimes you don't think about them until you start rambling, and then they just, they show up in your consciousness, and you're like, oh man, I have to mention this person. But yeah, Sam quit. He moved to Chicago and then went on to New York, and Gus recorded some extra stuff with him that, really never saw the light of day. And then he landed in New York in the late 90s. At that point, I'm dug in Gainesville big time. And so Strikeforce kind of came out of sort of there was always like an in-between. So Gus had a tour booked with Hot Water Music the summer of 1996. We were like, I felt like on fire. Like we just really wanted to create. We had no idea behind us. Hot Water was really starting to gain some attention. I had seen them for the first time play the summer before at a festival in Cleveland, Ohio, that we were playing. Gus was playing, I think, or maybe we just went to. I don't remember, but and they just blew my mind. Hot Water Music, just so much energy and just raw and just so ferocious and so engaging with the crowd, and great songs. The songs were great, if you strip back, and they played absolutely terrible equipment at that time. They toured in this tiny little minivan and played like crate amps, like the worst sounding amps like ever. But they were just such a phenomenal band. So I was very excited. We became friends with them and played up with them a few times, I think, between that summer and the next summer. So I was really excited to go on tour with them. Sam left, and then Ron just like, dude, I'm out. I'm going back to Miami. He's just like a diehard South Floridian, and he never felt, I think, comfortable in Gainesville, and he went back home. And then at that point, I was kind of bandless, but there was like this space on the tour. So before Ron left, and this kind of melts into Strikeforce, Chuck Reagan said, look, I got this friend down in Sarasota. His name's Kevin Scott. He plays drums. He's an awesome dude. You should have him come and try out for Gus. So he came up, we jammed a couple times, and then Ron just wasn't feeling it. I don't even think it was Kevin or not Kevin. I just think he was unhappy to be there. He just wanted to go home. And essentially he left, and now I have Kevin. And then I was living with sharing a bedroom with a guy named Will Good, who actually really good musician. I don't know what he's up to these days, but cool kid, really cool kid. And so now I have Kevin, I have Will, and we start this. And I said, guys, look, if we just start a band and write like 6 songs, we can go on tour with Hot Water Music. So that summer, that's what we did. We wrote 6 songs. We called the band the Union of June, because that's when we had gotten together, the Union of June. We had 6 songs. And then we did this like month tour with Hot Water Music. And Steve Heritage, I'll never forget this, Steve Heritage from Ass Suck, and who had recorded, a lot of bands, and he worked at Morris Sound, which was like the heavy metal recording studio down there. He drove. He was a huge, Hot Water Music fan and proponent, and I think he recorded their stuff. So he drove the van, and we just went on this crazy, like, hellish tour, out west, and it was awesome. I mean, it was great. It was just awesome dudes. I became, enamored with the band. I just fell in love with them as people. And George, when I went on to become roommates, a drummer, and I just texted him the other day, and it was great. But when we got back, it was just sort of like, I think Will left. He moved to San Francisco or Baltimore, and me and Kevin became very close. Kevin and I had just some similar, I think, childhood trauma that we connected over. And I just fell in love with him. He's so funny and so smart. He is so funny and so smart. And there was just like, constant like banter, and I just always loved it. I was like, dude, we're totally starting another band when we get back. And then, Matt was my roommate at the time, and Matt and I become friends, and he's just kicking around. And I think Tired From Now On kind of went separate ways. People moved away. And we literally shared a house, and all of our equipment was set up in the living room. So it's like, dude, go grab a bass. Let's go. So that's kind of how that started. And we had another roommate, Jose, on second guitar at first. This is even before it's called Strikeforce Diablo. And we just play around town. I think we had various names over the course of maybe 6 months. And then we finally kind of chunked out some songs that we felt were great. And Steve Heritage wound up recording at Morris Sound the first Strikeforce EP. So we did that down there, which is kind of crazy because that place is like legendary black metal studio. If you like Tampa, I don't know if it still has its reputation, but like, it was always like the, I talk about, the LA Strip in the 80s, if you're a glam rocker, but that's where you went if you were into like, black metal or thrash metal or death metal. Death metal's what is
sure. Were you into a lot of that stuff that was going on in the Tampa area? Maybe even later in years. Did you ever get into some of those bands?
Not particularly. Mm-hmm. No, it was a little too buzzsaw for me, a little too growly. I think I just always fell in love with melody. I need some essence of melody. It can be done in like a gruff voice, but just give me some notes. I need some notes. So I never really fell in love with bands like, I came to appreciate it a lot more later on, but particularly I didn't come from the scene of like Death and Cynic and Obituary and Dark Angel and like a lot of the bands. Oh, and Deicide,
okay,
and then all the European bands, right? Carcass and Cannibal Corpse, and like there's a whole thing. And then a lot of that kind of centered around Florida. That wasn't my vibe, but I loved that it was happening. So when we recorded, I think one of the guys from Deicide walked in, and he's like driving, this black 68 Camaro or something, all black tinted windows. And if I remember correct, he had like an upside down cross burned into his head, and I was like, damn, this shit's real down here, man. So that was kind of intimidating. And then the band that was recording in the studio next to us was a band called Jag Panzer, who I'd never heard of, but if you look them up, they're just like a legit old school metal band. anyway, so that was this first Strikeforce CD, and we let kind of Steve do what he wanted with it. Like we recorded on his amps. I didn't know the first thing about sounding good or recording or anything. So Steve kind of gave it, I think, kind of a metal kind of vibe because that's his world, right? So, I think when we first mixed it, I'm like, yeah, I want the guitars all the way to the right and the bass all the way to the left. And he's just like, no, you don't. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be awesome. And he's like, all right. He sent us a mix or something, or we left with like a mixed tape, because it's not like he's emailing us a mix in those days. So like we left with a tape and we at home listening to it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that does sound terrible. I just thought it'd be so cool because, Matt's over here doing his thing and I'm over here doing my thing, but no concept of like, how any of that really works. And I wanted it to sound raw. We were a raw band. That's how I was. So he made it sound definitely a lot heavier and a lot more, than we were, but I was grateful for it. Like I was very, still to this day, I think it's the best stuff Strikeforce ever did. When we play any of those songs off that first EP, I mean, that's just like, it's kind of like the hits,
Yeah.
like the stuff we enjoy playing. And I think it's the stuff that anyone who is a fan of the band, all like 12 of you out there, that's typically what they want to hear. So I sense so, but it was great. I mean, Matt Sweeting has been in fact, I should say this right now. You want to get someone on your show, you should talk to Matt. He's one of those guys that in a way flies under the radar because he's such a builder and a creator of moment. But, oftentimes he then walks out of the moment to let other people have that moment. And he finds a tremendous amount of joy in that. And I really figured that because he's always booking bands, doing shows, a lot of really great stuff happened at his house, dubbed the Utility House in the late 90s. And he, he always was the guy to book all the bands, do all the tours.
Yeah.
He went on. So, I feel like he's kind of a legend, and at least when it comes to Florida music, and has so much to say, and has done so much for other people and so much for me. I mean,
Yeah.
he's been a tremendous friend to me, and as someone that suffers with like depression and anxiety and ADD and dyslexia, I mean, he's helped me out. He's helped my family out. Like he's just really been a rock in that way. I get emotional just talking about the dude. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's what we have, that's
right.
the we have. And, that's, I mean, overarching, that's what I found playing music. I found people like him, I found, people that believed in what I was doing, saw some value in me that I never saw. I still struggle to see. And I, and made lifelong friends. I mean,
right.
family. And that has been the best part of it all, and it's still why I play, really, is just to be part of that family, And
there was a comment on the post that I made that you were going to be the next guest on the podcast. And I think Alex, thinks his name, AEF 1978. That's his handle on Instagram. But he left a comment for you to share some stories about the Utility House, because apparently he had seen. I guess I never had been, so I guess there were shows there. Like what are your memories of that?
So it was it was very common in that world to have shows in a house, to have shows in a basement, to have shows at a union hall, wherever you could make something happen, wherever you could gather people and it be okay that it's loud, it would happen that way. And I think that's really, coming out of Fort Lauderdale, South Florida, Miami, where you didn't have that, you just had to kind of work with like the geography and the terrain there, in Gainesville. It's like, it wasn't about, it wasn't reactionary, it was creative. It's like, it wasn't reacting to a situation you were in. It was just bypassing it altogether and creating a new one. And I think that's a better one, And I think that's what would happen to a lot at the utility house. So it's just a house. 4 guys live there. Just so happens one of the guys that lived there, one was Matt Sweeting, and Matt was just and I don't know really where he got started doing this. Like, I never really asked him, like, what was your incentive, but he just started having bands play in his living room. I mean, that's how I remember it. I don't really know beyond that, which is kind of weird that I don't. But now,
Were his parents around at that time? What were they thinking of this?
Oh, no, Matt was there for college. He was going to UF.
Okay.
He was a Latin American history major at UF, and there were 4 other dudes. This was like 2 blocks from the UF campus. And they just had a huge living room. This living room was massive. And
had to have been if you're having shows.
Yeah, it was really big, like comparatively. I mean, I live in a New York apartment, so everything's massive for me. But it was just a really big open living room, and it had this little cove. It's like an old Florida style cracker house. So it just had that kind of like, I don't know, like northern colonial kind of look to it, I guess. But yeah, all wood floors and a huge front porch. So really great for like the party hang, keg is out there, bands are inside, and it had just this huge like oak door. I mean, the doorway was just massive. So it was very easy to get lots of people in and out at the same time. That's how I remember it anyway.
Sure, it helped with beer too.
Yeah, totally. And as soon as you walked in, boom, like there was a thing. And then there was a dining room that connected that, and drums and amps could kind of sit over there while one band was playing. And then, it would just get packed and hot and crazy. And it'd be a lot of Gainesville bands, but there'd be some touring bands coming through playing there, and just, I don't have the best memory for that stuff. Like Matt it would remember every single band that's played the living room. I think I just have a few instances, but of just really good times. I think we had like Party Helicopters play. I think Mineral played there once. Who else? I'm not doing it justice. Like a Carp, I think, played the living room once at the utility house. Damn, so bad with that stuff. But there's just a great venue, and it was a good time, and it's a college town, so it's like everyone is just ready to fucking party and have a good time. There's no fights, there's no weapons, there's just and it's very equal. Like it just felt highly collective. It's not just a bunch of jocks beating each other up in front of the stage. It's like everybody's in front of the stage. Guys, girls, everybody was creating, and it's the first time I ever started playing in a band with a female. Essentially, I started playing with this band, Vanbuilderass, who had a house down the street. I became friendly with the drummer, this guy, John Weisberg, who also plays in Asshole Parade. We both spent time in Yonkers, living in Yonkers as kids. So we would talk about, going to movies at Movie Land, and going to Dragon's Den for comics, and stealing Iron Maiden tapes, some Crazy Eddies, and just weird shit like that. So we really connected. We both love thrash metal, 80s thrash metal. So we really connected on that. But we both, he played in this like super punk band, Vanbuilderass, and needed another guitar player. So I started playing with them. And Jessie Vanbuilderass was just super cool chick, man. I just thought she was just a rock star, and her and the other guitar player, Amanda, Jessie played bass and sang, and then there was Amanda who played guitar. He's just so cool. I just I didn't have a lot of interaction, on that level, before. So that was really eye-opening. And again, shy kid, not really having a lot of female experiences in my life, just let alone creating and seeing everything that was happening. So it really gave me this whole perspective, and that I didn't really have before, that I think if I'd gotten stuck in South Florida, might have really, it shaped my worldview for the better, and that's what I wanted to do when I got up there. So you joked about playing in lots of different bands. Like that became something I wanted to do. Like, I like these guys, I like this band, how can I get in it? That sort of just became kind of a thing. And Vanbuilderass, only did a few shows with them, and then Jessie moved to San Francisco, and that disbanded. And then John's like, "Oh, dude, you should play for my thrash band, Asshole Parade." So I started playing with Asshole Parade, and that was awesome. That was a blast. That's so many good memories of playing with those guys and playing that just like ferocious music. And it was really great because the other guitar player in the band, this guy Brian Johnson, I went to high school with, and I never knew him in high school, but he went to Taravella High, but he would always wear the same 7 Seconds t-shirt. I always tell him this story when I see him. I don't know why, but we talked about this for years in Nassau Parade. I was like, dude, I always want to come up to you because I thought you were so cool because you were into 7 Seconds. And I just didn't feel cool enough to be into that band. I'm a huge fan and I became a huge fan, but at that time I just was intimidated by him. So fast forward, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, I'm playing, in a thrash band with him in Gainesville. We did a bunch of touring and that was pretty awesome. Played Gilman Street, this big, sort of thrash noise festival out there. And then Matt went on to replace me in that band.
Was that the first time that you were in a band that actually traveled that far?
No, Gus had done that. Gus
Okay.
had done like a 2-month tour, a few years prior with Matt. That's when me and Matt became friends. So no, we kind of just, we drop our dishwashing jobs, leave for 2 weeks, go play a string of shows that we booked, on payphones using with dialers. That was the thing back then. You'd have a dialer so it would mimic a coin drop in a
Right.
payphone, and that's how you book shows. And there'd just be lists. I remember once this guy gave me this guy Clay, who was played in some great bands, Highway 66 and some other bands back in those days, had like a list. You had a list. Somebody had a list of like kids in other states and cities that book shows. And it was like you'd show up and then, like be like, okay, so, meet my guy over, my friend in the corner. And then, he's going to be on a bike, but just follow the bike, and then it'd be some house or some basement. And that's just how we toured, and that was just awesome. That was just so a lot, just so connective, just you really just loved it. It was just so different. And I felt like I was part of something that was so special, and I think everybody feels that way when they're doing their music and at a young age, and everything is an adventure. But yeah, so but
What were the crowds like at an Asshole Parade show?
Well, yeah, pretty crazy. It was kind of the first time people started like going bananas to like a band that I was in. Now I had no problem like going bananas to other bands, jumping off the stage, doing stupid shit. But this was the first time I'm there and I'm playing, and the music just, I mean, you just got going, and it was just like, it's just like a blender. It was just like, the music sounded like a blender. It was like a blender going on, and everybody was in the blender. And it was just great. And it was challenging too. The music wasn't particularly technical, but it was fast. And that was the thing. They'd be like, Drew, don't do any of they would joke at me because they would tease me because I would try and throw in these like little, melodic things, and they'd call them neener neeners. Like, no neener neeners. Stop with the neener neeners. Just power chords. Stay on the dots, but play fast. And that was always the thing. And yeah, it was great. And then yeah, Gainesville, my time there was amazing. And there was a time where kind of the music died off. I wasn't really playing. And Gainesville started becoming very kind of claustrophobic for me, it's a small town, and I was, at the time I was bartending at like, the cool bar. It's still like the cool bar in town, which was a lot of fun and a great place to work.
What was that called?
Oh, the Top Restaurant. And I loved working there. It was awesome. And the owners were great and just did awesome, and made good friends there. And I lived 2 blocks away, and I lived with my girlfriend at the time. But I wasn't really playing music anymore. That kind of fell to the wayside. And I just thought, what am I doing here? So, I mean, that's when I decided to pick up and leave. But
before you left, one of my favorite bands from the Gainesville area that Strikeforce Diablo did a split with was I Hate Myself.
Oh,
so what was your memory of that split with them, and any memories of seeing them play?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Marburger Brothers were also another talented bunch. In fact, I just saw Jim was up here not long ago, and we went to like a guitar effect pedal, synth pedal convention. He was up here for work. He's a brilliant mind, and his brother, Jim, absolute talent. songwriter. Yeah, I loved I Hate Myself. I love I Hate Myself. I mean, they were a band that I think, and I'm sure people have said this, but in their genre, if you want to use the term screamo, or whatever, I don't know what anyone would call it, but they were pretty pioneering. Like they, could have been like a Captain Jazz or something like that. They could have, they were, I mean, to people that love the band, they refer to them, oh, I hate myself. And you felt it. Like there was a time where they were writing incredible music and people were really digging them. And you just kind of felt this palpable, sort of vibration. Like these guys could really do a lot. And, I know, they just weren't really that band. They just really wanted to kind of keep it theirs and do it the way they wanted to do it, and they just didn't really have, I think, the drive to do more than that. But yeah, putting out a split with I Hate Myself, I mean, they were contemporaries, right? These were the bands we were playing with and our friends, and that was a no-brainer, to do something like that. And another band of that time very close with was a 12-hour turn. And these were a Jacksonville band, and
Right.
Argentina actually went to and did a tour with them out west, which was awesome and a lot of fun. And that was the one big tour Argentina ever did, and it was with the 12-hour turn guys. And the bass player Dave, we still play music now. Like I met him 25 odd years ago, longer than that, really. And he happened to be up here in New York. He moved up about 6 months before I did. And then, he lived in kind of a different area. So we'd hang out here and there. But, he then moved to my neighborhood and was like, dude, let's start a band. And I hadn't picked up a guitar probably 10 years, just like working and living. And, New York's tough. It doesn't lend itself, to it, getting that done if doing extracurricular things, if you're just grinding it out to survive, which is really what my first years were like. And so Dave and I play in Lepesh. That's the musical project that I do now and have been doing, I guess, 7 or so years. And yeah, I'm grateful for it. I mean, we we reminisce a lot about those days. It's always a conversation like, oh, remember that time or that person, or, oh my God, that was awesome. And, they were 12-hour turn was definitely another one of those bands. And Dave would be another great guy to get on the call too, or Rich, Rich DM, he runs this label Bakery Outlet.
Right.
Still plays in a lot of great Florida bands, incredible human being. Great dad, teacher, just love the DM brothers,
And come to think of it, actually, I don't think I've had anyone on the podcast that has been out of Jacksonville. I don't know why. So maybe someone from 12-hour turn could be the first, because they're also one of my personal favorite bands from Florida.
Yeah. Well, Limp Bizkit's from Jacksonville.
They are.
Yeah.
They are from Jacksonville. So 12-hour turn, you did that split with them as well. What are your memories of that split?
I think, it's like anything else. The cool thing about a split 7-inch, and Gus had done a split 7-inch with the Gus from Canada. Part of the whole thing about doing something like that is really you get a chance to kind of like, this is how I kind of saw it anyway, is like, a band that you like or friends with gets to be in your band for a minute, and you get to be in their band for a minute, because now you're collaborating on something together. And really you're just collaborating mostly on the artistic element, right? The layout, or like, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Or, maybe whoever's actually putting it out, if there's a label involved, comes up with something. But one of the songs that we put on the 12-hour turn split, Strikeforce Diablo, we wrote it, and and I for the record, and I was just like, I really want to put their band name in here. And so, God, Jesus Christ, if I remember correctly, oh my God, I hope I'm not gonna not remember this correctly. But on the 12-hour turn split, there is one of our songs does mention 12-hour turn in the song, and referred to as another 12-hour turn. And the title, the name of the band was in reference to the guys that worked in the coal mines, if I remember correctly. Like they would do what was called a 12-hour shift, their 12-hour turn. So they'd work at, so I think it was, and I at the time that this particular song was written, I was just like, I think working like 2 or 3 jobs, just grinding it out constantly. And it's like, oh man, another double or something like that. So that's where it kind of just fell into it. But it was funny to be able to throw that in there as like a little like Easter egg for them to discover, like, oh shit, those motherfuckers put our band name in one of their songs.
Was that their reaction when they finally heard it?
Yeah, they loved it. I mean, yeah, it was great. I mean, we were just such big fans of each other as human beings. And that was another thing too, is that, I really admired what those guys were doing in Jacksonville, because there really wasn't a really, God, you want to talk about, a cultural wasteland being South Florida. I mean, Jacksonville is just like a whole other thing, It's, so those guys brought the DIY in a major way to Jacksonville, and they were highly inclusive, so like you go to shows at their house, they called it the Magnifico house. It was just this big house that all of them lived in, and bands would play in the living room. And then they'd feed the bands. You could sleep there. It was awesome. It was just like they kind of they really held it down for Jacksonville in a huge way. And it was great. Just and I'm still close with all those guys, man. I think I sent you a picture of this, but Matt Oliver, the drummer of 12-Hour Turn, and I played in a Black Sabbath tribute band for years together.
Yeah.
Where we would dress up like Black Sabbath. We would do it on like Halloween or around Halloween, or I think we did it for the fest maybe once or twice. We played like one of the early fests.
The Volume 4, right?
The Volume 4. Yeah. That was and that was awesome, man. That was just such a blast playing with him, because he's one of my favorite drummers, just I love that kid, man. And he rips so hard. And I'm a huge fan of drummers too. Like, it's like, if I love drums and I love drummers, and he's one of my favorites. And
what's one of your favorite Black Sabbath songs to play as a cover?
A good question. Actually, it was Changes. So one of their ballads, I'm going through changes, and it's such a beautiful song, and we learned it for, I think, one of the last shows. We only did it, I think, once live, and God bless him. The guitar player, Brian, who's another dear old friend. He was like road managed against me, really brilliant photographer, sort of all around, intellectual, tornado. Guy's just awesome, super smart, and just love him to death. He played guitar. And what's crazy about the Black Sabbath thing, is funny we're talking about this, but it was just, we lived across the street at the time, and he was playing guitar. I remember he was playing me like a Bad Brains song. I'm like, oh dude, that's awesome. I fucking love Dr. No. I love Bad Brains. And I think we were talking about that. And then just somehow came into, hey, Halloween's coming up. We should do a cover band. Because I love the idea of dressing up. I love the idea I always loved Halloween. It was always my favorite holiday, and I always get wild on Halloween. It's like, let's do a cover band. What should we do? And it's like, oh, let's do Misfits. I'm like, everybody does Misfits or something stupid. It's like, well, we got to do metal. We got to do, like, yeah, we're not good enough to play metal. I'm like, what about Black Sabbath? And we argue about this. He says Black Sabbath was his idea. I'm pretty sure it was my idea. But the guy went and he learned all these Black Sabbath songs. It actually helped him become a great guitar player. Like, he didn't really play much guitar prior to that. He knew a couple riffs, a couple Bad Brains riffs, but then he's all of a sudden like shredding, like Tony Iommi is like one of my favorite guitar players, and so here he is kind of ripping these solos. I'm like, okay, we're doing it. I guess I'm going to be Ozzy, because I had some element of pipes, I guess, and I'm a pasty Brit, my mother, I feel like I could fill out the Ozzy role pretty well. So
you want to give us an example right now of your Ozzy impression?
Oof.
I'm
No, I
kidding.
don't. But I would go. No, listen. I would go into like full Aussie mode, man. Like I would get the accent and everything, man, between the songs. But when I was singing it, Ozzy's
That's
voice
good.
is thanks, man.
That's pretty good.
Ozzy's voice is it's so unique.
Yeah.
Like his timbre, like what sounds like fucking Ozzy, like and
Ozzy.
yeah, I guess Ozzy. That's it. And yeah, I'm a huge Black Sabbath fan. And
When
that was our connection with Matt from 12 Hour Turn. He loved Black Sabbath too.
Yeah.
And it was on that Argentina tour, I think was where we'd hang out in the back of the van and just like crank Sabbath and just like, oh, dude, this is the best. And we were getting into a lot of stoner shit back then, like Sleep was really, a huge like late 90s thing for me. And just that was like where my mind was at that time, and admittedly smoking probably way too much pot. So
what was the reaction like when the Volume 4 played a gig, like a gig like the Fest, because clearly that's not what you would expect when you go to something like the Fest. So what was the reaction like when you guys played?
It was amazing. It was awesome. It was great because everybody was in on it. Everybody knew that this was going to be a theatrical kind of presentation, and it was going to be ridiculous. And I was going to come out either really drunk or tripping, or just like really insane. And I know this could sound ridiculous because we really did it all as a joke, but we took it seriously. Like the costumes kicked ass. Like we really went out of our way to find like stuff that looked real, and we really wanted to put on a show. And we, that was one of the things that you didn't get in the punk rock world, or the DIY music scene. It's like it was about like simplicity and we're inclusivity, and we're all part of it, and it's amazing and it's beautiful. But this is not what we wanted. We wanted to just like really blow minds and like put on a show and just get weird. So we'd get lights, and I think we actually got a friend of ours to like actually have some mild pyrotechnics one year. I would have like costume changes. I would come out with bags of fake cocaine that was like powdered sugar, and man, people just got nuts. It was fun. I mean,
I bet
it was blast. And I think and it just showed me like the power of theatrical entertainment, even if it's kind of ridiculous. So when I look back at bands like, Iron Maiden, who I absolutely love, we didn't even talk about my love for Iron Maiden, but, or the old metal bands, or, the big rock show, like, because in Gainesville, you didn't have that. To get it, you had to go to Orlando to see an arena show, but like, who cared? Like, I was so not interested in that at that point anyway. That to bring something like that to whatever, the 200 of our drunk ass friends that are going to come out and just fucking fist bang, and just, so that was right. It was a real release. It, to this day, is probably the most fun I ever had on stage. It was like not nervous, wearing a stupid wig and like bell bottoms and tassels, and it's like the only time I'm not nervous on stage. Like, what is that? So I think having that was great. And
yeah, that may have played a big part of it though, and why you may not have felt that way is because you were kind of in character. And sometimes when we're in character, we don't feel some of the same anxiety or fears that we would feel when we're just being ourselves.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely 100% true. And I think if you talk to a lot of really successful and talented actors, they'd probably tell you the same thing. Like, it's like you think I'm up there acting a fool, or just completely transforming my personality. But no, I get to hide in here. I get to just, that guy goes away. Like, so I get to be this guy, and it, so the Black Sabbath tribute band was fun, but I only brought that up because that was something that me and Matt connected on. And that's just been the cool thing, is like, you just, all throughout my journey playing music, it's always just been like, I love what you're doing. Let's do it together. That's kind of how I started playing with Floor. It was another band that I just absolutely loved, and we hadn't really even touched on my time with them. But
yeah,
I was
Let's
so
let's talk about that because that's another one of my personal favorite bands from Florida is
me
Floor.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. I'd probably say Load, Floor, Load. Thinking Miami bands. Who else? Floor, Load. A really great band called Cell 63 that I really love.
Oh yeah.
Rocco. Yeah, the Enablers. He's another one, man. Like kind of an early hero of mine. Like he was a teacher. So like I just think about these Florida bands that like weren't just my contemporaries, my friends, but ones that I really looked up to and I really loved. But Floor was definitely one of them. And we shared, their first 7-inch and the first Gus 7-inch came out on the same label. So our friend Jason Page, and who's still a dear friend and still does stuff. He did the layout for the Strikeforce Diablo record, which because we bother him to do shit. but he's another guy that would be good to talk to. I don't know if he talk to you, but he's got a lot. He's done a lot for the Florida music scene in my experience. So but Floor I saw them play at Churchill's for the first time, maybe in mid '93. And I was just blown away. I was like, dude, this is the heaviest band I've ever heard in my life. There's not even a bass player. And it was just like tickling all of those like Melvinsy funny bones. And, really reminding me of him. Keep in mind, 1993, right? So Kurt Cobain's not even dead. And I only mention him because, I think, whether you were into that, independent music before Nirvana, after Nirvana, whatever was your catalyst, I probably somewhere skate the middle. And, but, it really opened up so many minds, at those years, like we had MTV, we had the radio, and then we had like what your, maybe older brother or sister or cousin listened to, but that was it, and then what your friends talked about. We didn't have the internet to where you could just find everything. So anyway, I when first time I heard Floor, I remember thinking this like there's a hidden track on the Nevermind album on the CD called Endless Nameless. And it's just like Kurt Cobain just make just a bunch of noise, it's like the song they wouldn't let them put on, the record label probably wouldn't let them put on the record because it was just so bombastic and noise. But at the end of the song, he just tunes down the guitar, and then it's at the last notes he's hitting are just this like flubbed out, distorted low E string. And it's like my first thinking when I saw Floor was like, okay, this band heard that song and then maybe a couple Melvin songs and just said, let's do a band that's just completely surrounded by that. But there was more to it than that. It was like ethereal. It was ambient. There was melody in the vocals, and then when Steve would get gnarly and gruff, it was like the most burly thing you could do. So you'd hear the range, and it was so heavy and sonic. And I, knowing more about guitar playing and sound and recording that I know now, it's like, man, you take the guitar, you turn it down, tune it really low, but then you take 2 or 3 more strings and you tune them all really low to the same exact note. You're going to get just this chorus, this wall of sound. It's really, and then you have 2 guitar players doing that same exact thing, not deviating, no harmonies, not you do this, I do this. We just doing the same thing. It is so powerful, and it really bowled me over. So anyway, yeah, huge Floor fan. Love Floor.
How did you get connected to play with them?
Well, Steve, Henry, they had Betty was their first drummer, and then they had this guy Jeff, and Jeff was amazing. He was a total just stoner ripper. A lot of like my really favorite Floor stuff was Jeff on drums. Originally. And then I met this dude, Henry Wilson. He played in a band called Syrup. And I actually met him, I think, in a basement in Washington, D.C. His band was playing, and I believe probably Gus was playing. That's what it had to be. I think we're on tour with another great Florida band, Claire Mel. super awesome dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
I'm a
ever,
big fan of Claire Mel, and I had Lee
yeah.
Mullins from
Oh,
Syrup on the podcast too. So
oh, awesome.
got to hear some great Syrup stories and history there.
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, another guy that will be great is Henry, because Henry is such a good storyteller, and he's a talker, and he's a Florida boy, man. Man, I could tell you some crazy stories about Henry. Um, so we met Henry and I met um, at a show, and then we became, just band friends, I guess. And then he wound up playing in Floor. Floor had kind of disbanded. I think Steve moved to Atlanta. They just weren't really doing anything. And then Henry started doing this band Dove, super heavy, kind of crazy, spastic, heavy shit. Like never the same riff twice, but super heavy, awesome stuff. And he's just a ripping guitar player, man. It's just like I love Henry's guitar play. He's one of my favorite fucking guitar players that ever came out of Florida, man. He's just amazing. He's fucking the dude is just straight rock and roll. I mean, he is Jimmy fucking Page. The dude just slings it. You know what I mean? Like, not to be crass, but like his dick is this big and has 6 strings on it. You know what I mean? Like that's Henry Wilson on stage, like commanding, shredding, just so awesome to watch. And he's a sick drummer too. So anyway, I don't remember where I heard this, but all of a sudden he's playing drums on Floor. They're back together. And they come up to Gainesville to play. I think Henry, me and Ron kind of to try and I think kind of do some stuff. Ron Sass with Gus, and I think we borrowed Henry's rehearsal space in Winter Haven, which is where he lived and where he'll probably die because he's just like absolutely feels like he needs to be in Winter Haven for some crazy reason, but he's just like that's his spot, man. He's like the mayor of that town. Anyway, so yeah, so just became friends with him through borrowing his space, and there's just that relationship that you have with just so many Florida bands. But I remember the 2 quintessential things happening. Floor came up to play, and I think they played this venue, the Arc. And this would have been this would have been in like 2001 or 2002. And they just recorded the self-titled record. It hadn't come out yet. They're back, and they played it for me in their van. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like the first track, Scimitar, do-doom, doom, doom, do boom, doom, doom. I'm like, oh my God, this record is so fucking amazing. This is so sick. And Steve's incredible vocals. But now there's vocal harmonies just like swimming over everything. And he was going in that direction anyway with a lot of their, 7-inch stuff. But I was just losing my mind. I just was so stoked on that record and the band and what was about to come. And then I think then the record came out on No Idea. And then I think we played a show with them at Wayward Council. And it was like a smaller show. And that was a record store, Wayward Council.
That was a cool little, I was only there maybe once or twice, and it was a neat little spot.
Yeah. It was an incredible feat. And that's all, not all Matt Sweeting, but that is, he is one of like a handful of people that really kept that going and really did it. It was a full on, collectively run record store.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing thing. Like one of just so many amazing things that could never happen in a lot of different places just based on the attitudes of the people that live in them. So we play this thing, and I think I came up and I insisted probably on singing one of the songs, I think it's the song Lolita off that record. Just something that was really singy and anthemic. And I got up there, or maybe they asked me to sing it. I don't remember. It was something like that. And I just got there and sang it. And I think between seeing me play that night and then singing the songs, I think it was really soon after that where I think Henry hit me up and he's like, dude, do you want to do some shows with this band? And I was like, hell yeah. I'm like, what are you looking? He said, well, the record has vocal harmonies on it. It's like the guitars are a little more nuanced. And we want to fill out the sound, and they had done that in the past. Like they had bass players before. In fact, Ron, who played in Gus, played bass and Floor for a minute. And for a while, he did some shows with them. And then which is totally random, but and which was awesome, by the way. One of the best times I ever saw that band play. They played the Hardback Cafe. Ron was playing bass, and our friend Niles, I forget, came from work. It was Niles or Adrian, I forget. It was these two twin brothers, but came with like these cardboard tubes, like the maybe he worked at like a paper mill or something, and the whole place was just like fighting with these cardboard tubes, and they would just like just disintegrate. But it's like everyone's holding up these cardboard tubes. It was just really amazing. So weird shit like that would always happen, and they would just have their smoke machines going, and that was always like a thing in itself. It's like, to fog out a living room and then just like the heaviest notes you've ever heard in your life. Oh, boom, 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 just like this just crushing earthquake of music would come at you. It was awesome. And so, I wasn't really doing much of the time. Strikeforce wasn't really doing anything at that time. I wasn't really playing much music. I was actually working at a state theater building sets, and I started actually doing some acting. So started, if you can believe it, just kind of doing plays and kind of getting into that, which, of course, Matt Sweeting, my cheerleader, pushed me into doing. But they asked me to go on tour with them. They said, "Look, we want to fill out the sound. We need a guitar player. You totally could handle it." So, and that's what I did. So I toured with them. We did like something in late '92. I think. And then we did like kind of a spring thing in '93. And then, man, my memory is so terrible with this stuff. Definitely late '92, like fall of '92. And we went out as a 4-piece. And then I think the tour, and then we did, I think, the Midwest. And I remember as first time I saw Mastodon was on that tour. And then we did a bunch of shows with High on Fire. And Pelican, I think. And it was cool. It was awesome. It was really great. And just so great to play these songs. Because not just the songs on the self-titled record, which were like amazing, but all their 7-inch stuff that I loved. To play the song that was on like the other 7-inch Lonin. The song was called Lonin. And it was like their really, the first song on their first 7-inch. That came out on Dirge Records, Gus's first record, to play even that song, which I just listened to over and over again. I was just like, dude, I get to go on stage and play these fucking songs. Like, it was great. And Steve and I became very close. We all came close. We became very close. And the next time around, I guess there was some Floor Guys had a very tumultuous relationship, as many bands do. And I think there was one tour where I think Anthony, who I also really loved dearly, Anthony was really the spiritual kind of guide of that band. We would talk about meditation, he was really into transcendental meditation, and we would talk about, other worlds and like, I don't know, like every conversation was very poignant, and it was very, yeah, like I'd walk away going, man, I'm definitely the dumbest guy in the room, but I'm so stoked to be here. So all those guys just had such personality, and it was tough too. The touring I did with Floor was really hard because the tours sucked, and they would be the first to say it. Like, they just didn't have their thing yet. They were trying to they had had this little early '90s buzz going about them. Then they kind of disappeared. Then they
Right.
this really awesome record on No Idea, and the booking agent wasn't really on top. Like, we'd show up at shows, and kids would be like, "Why are you playing this dumb fucking shitty bar? Like, the scene is down there. You should be playing this." Everybody would go. So it's like I felt like we were just sort of like off kilter, and it was a bit of a struggle. And then we got back, and time passed, and and then Steve actually hit me up and said, "Hey man, I'm going to start a new band, and if you're into it, Juan Montoya is going to play." And I was just like, "Oh dude, Juan Montoya, fuck yeah." I love Juan. I don't know if you know Juan Montoya, but a legend in his own right, and an absolutely phenomenal guitar player, and an absolute sweetheart of a guy. God, I had his artwork hanging up. He always draw some crazy weird artwork. But so I was stoked because, I would see Juan playing bands like Ed Metusa Struggle, or before that, a band called Pontius Pilate. Um, and really just awesome guitar player. He just had this like frantic kind of Dr. No meets Vernon Reed, kind of thing. And I don't know what was going on. It was just so spastic and weird. And he played his guitar all hyped up. And that's what I thought was cool about
There
it.
have been some requests for a Juan Montoya interview, so maybe that may happen sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Perhaps we'll see.
Yeah, you absolutely should. I think you'd be in for a treat. I mean, and yeah, he was just an awesome dude. And anyway, so I was stoked. I'm like, Steve
Yeah.
and Juan and Henry, and like was it Henry? I think we tried to get it together, something to that extent, and I could be wrong, but that's how I remembered. Or we were getting floor back together with Juan, and we started writing songs. Steve had actually come up to Gainesville a couple times, and he was allowing me to contribute at this point. I was thrilled. Like, I was like, dude, I'm not really doing anything band wise, and I know the formula. Like, let's do this. So I threw out a couple riffs. I threw out some lyrics that I had, just a couple things. And then a lot of that stuff just wound up becoming Torch. So that first Torch record, there's some of my riffage on there and some of my lyrics on there, which is cool because it's another great band. And I'm so proud of Steve and those guys for doing everything they did with Torch. I mean, another awesome band and incredible people.
Why didn't you play more with them?
I think it was just distance. I think it could have easily happened, but I think I just think he just he connected with those guys down there, and Jonathan Nunez, and I think just that made more sense, and yeah, I totally got it. It was awesome. And Torch would come up and play, and I was just like, dude, this band is amazing. And Juan, being the ripper that he is, really added like this super like rock and roll element to it that was a lot of fun. But all the Torch stuff I've really liked. I mean, so yeah, it's cool. I mean, I know, Steve and I talk now and again, just a random text here. I'll find an old photo, or I'll say, hey man, how you doing? And we'll check up, and yeah, he's living the dream, man. He's out like in, I think, middle of Oregon somewhere, living on a farm, just being Steve, doing his, the quiet life, growing his hair out,
Yeah.
being that guy. So, yeah, it's awesome. I mean, like, it's just another instance where you just kind of like, you love what somebody's doing, and whether you're witnessing it as an audience member or you're a participant, as a player or collaborator, it's for me, the intrinsic value and the reward is very much the same. So
Sure.
I mean, man, and very thankful for it. And I'm just thankful to have had an opportunity to express myself, and made some incredible friends along the way, and got to just travel extensively and make friends along the way that way too. I mean, it's really a special thing, I don't just music obviously does what it does. I'm looking at you and I see a pretty massive record collection behind you, and so it's clear that you know what I'm talking about. But I think also any kind of element of connectivity that is cultivated, nurtured within the sphere of creativity is a very different connection than like, oh, this is my bowling buddy, or oh, this guy, yeah, he works in my office, or hey, we went to high school together. Like, that's all wonderful and great friendships can come out of everywhere. But maybe I'm biased, so maybe I'm not really the best person to say this, but I mean, I don't know who is, but my experience has been like, here's what I can say when trying to describe what my life has been like, what my life has been like having been involved in music the way I have, people that have not had that experience, like, you know, don't, find it very hard to believe that that exists, whatever that is, the sense of friendship or community. I can actually, my partner, Sarah, who's just the love of my life and an amazing human being. And, I sometimes I wish, she came from a very different world and she loves music. We went and saw Pinback the other day. In fact, that was one of our connective bands, was Pinback. And she's introduced me some music that I've never thought I'd be listening to. So, but generally, in as 20 somethings, our worlds were a little bit different. And when she meets the people that I'm close to, or meets my friends, or like, how do you know this guy? Who's this guy? And it's just like, she's always blown away by like, man, you are so lucky that you had all of this, just like, and it's like, I didn't always have it, but I found it, and I'm so grateful that I did.
When Strikeforce Diablo reunited at MonuFest last year, are you finding that there are kids who are discovering a band like that now, or are you still getting new fans?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're not very aggressive, in terms of shows or in terms of promotion, and internet, presence or anything like that. It's definitely there, but to be fair, and not remotely to be realistic, we were never a big band, we were never a band to play in front of a lot of people. We were never a band to do really a lot. We have the music that we have, and I'm proud of it. And two of my best friends in the world are in the band with me, and my brothers I love so much. But we weren't really, particularly big band. But yeah, I mean, sure, it's there. I even see it with Lepesh too, like it's definitely there. And I mean, look, we could get into a conversation about the music industry, but I mean, just in general, it's like people don't buy new music. Like 75% of the records that are sold are like 10 to 20 years old, so it's like so many people are looking to the past for music. And what, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't want to be the old guy that's like saying, yeah, fucking kids today, music sucks, but it kind of does. It just kind of does, a lot of it does. And I'm so grateful that I got to witness, and, like the last era, like what's to indicate anything anymore? Like, I feel it's like we like I feel like time is gauged in iPhone iterations. It's like, what, what I mean? Like, year, tell me the difference. Now, maybe again, total ignorance, old guy shit, but like, if I say the year 2020, oh, okay, maybe it's not a good example because I think we all have a reference for 2020.
Yeah, we do.
But if I say the year 2019 or 2009, the fuck's the difference? That you don't have like these very indicative things, and maybe that's just like I'm coming from my experience, but I think I'm just grateful that I had a pre-internet, pre-cell phone existence as an adult, quote unquote,
Sure.
as a young adult. And I do say that, I can say that because, still playing music and playing with younger bands, they don't look at me as like, oh, who's this old dude? Like, man, hang it up. It's like, because, that wouldn't have happened like in our day, like I should say in the 90s. Like if I was at a show in the 90s, and if there was someone that was middle-aged, they were so periphery, or peripheral, that it wouldn't matter. But, I'll play shows with Lepesh and there'll be much younger bands. And like, it's just like, they do seem to be a little bit like, man, and in conversations, like, man, I wish I was there for that. That sounds so awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, so with Strikeforce, we've definitely had people that have come up to us after the shows and stuff and be like, I missed it the first time around.
Yeah.
I was only 10, but now I'm 30 and I'm so glad I got to see you guys.
Yeah.
So that is amazing. That's awesome.
Totally. Because sometimes you think with some of those bands, they're not gonna get back together, right? So when you get a chance to see a band like Strikeforce, and also, shout out to Ashtray Monument.
Yes.
They put out, so I do have a copy.
Yeah.
They put out this wonderful Strikeforce Diablo compilation. I'm really glad this came out because I have the 7 inches and what have you, and the EP. It's nice to just have everything in one collection now and be able to hear it without having to flip the record in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. And yeah, we're super thankful to Drew and the guys from Ashtray for making that happen. I mean, you know, it didn't take much convincing. It's like, oh, you put out Strikeforce stuff? Yeah, man, have at it. But after learning about the label and seeing what he's doing and seeing what you're doing, it's like, man, it's just so awesome that that people are still doing stuff. I think that's just the important thing. Just people you just have to do stuff, and do stuff, make stuff, and do it with love, do it with kindness, don't react, create, you know. And I think if you create, you don't have to react, And I think that's it. And that's the unfortunate political situation we find ourselves in. It's a battle between creators and reactionaries, and the reactionaries feel like they need to protect themselves from what is, like, not how they can, create a place where, you don't have to protect yourself. You don't have to be armed. You don't have to worry about what somebody else is doing or how they choose to live their life, and unfortunately, just too many people that feel like, they have to protect and defend something that is, just the antithesis of creation in my mind, but, I'm not a religious person, but I am a spiritual person. And I do believe that, we are here to create, that's what these are for. That's what these are for. That's what this is for. That's what this is for. That's what we can do that, like, my dog Otto can't do. He can go shit outside,
Sure.
and he can lick my face and give me snuggles. But he can't, create and be a conduit for change. So I think it's important that, what you're doing is very important, Jeff. I mean, really,
thank you.
I mean, just as important as everything that's on those records behind you, maybe even arguably more so. So
I really appreciate the feedback on that, Drew. It means a lot, and grateful for having the opportunity to have you on the podcast and to tell your story in your own words, and quite different than maybe doing a interview for a zine back in the 90s. This is something where now you have a chance to really look back in retrospect and speak the words out loud and share the experiences. And I know if we were going through every single one, we'd be here for probably a couple weeks. So
yeah, for sure, man. Yes, this could go on all.
Yes,
and
but it's been.
I love to talk, so
it's been great though, getting a chance to document the story and to hear about some of the bands you've been in, and maybe some of the bands that people may not have been aware that you were even in. And I thank you a great deal. Yeah. Is there any last final words you want to share to just fans of yours, the people that came out to all the shows over the years and still come out to see you play, even up in New York or anywhere else that you may play gigs? Anything you want to share or quickly acknowledge to the people who are fans of yours?
Oh, wow. That's just thank you. Thank you for, allowing me. Thank you for, singing lyrics back to me. Thank you for attending. Thank you for listening. Thank you for kindness. Thank you for accepting me. All of that. Just absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's. I don't know if I would have made it otherwise. Like things could. If I hadn't discovered music, things could have went a very different way for me. And I could say that about a lot of my friends. Just South Florida is a weird place, man. And very easy to do a lot of weird shit down there. And yeah, I'm grateful that I found just incredible human beings and people that allowed me to, occupy the same air and learn something. That's it.